So we are at Santapod Raceway, as you can see, and we're going to drive this Vauxhall Nova, which is four-wheel drive converted, for the first time. So if you're wondering how I did all this, let's rewind 1 year. Now, I've owned my current Nova SR for 10 years, and I want to do something very special with it. I want to do something different and something you've probably never seen before. And I want to show you guys exactly how I do it as I go along. So here she is. I've just dragged her out of hibernation, and as you can see, she is filthy, unloved, and in desperate need of a full restoration. The biggest thing I want to do is fit this four-wheel drive system. Now, this is a fully working Calibra four-wheel drive system with a locked transfer box. Whoa, you can't do that. They're crap. They were crap in the day. Why the hell would you consider even thinking about using that system? They were terrible. Get an Evo. Loads better. Everybody loves an Evo. They're cheap, aren't they? Sorry, mate, but that's a proper daft idea. Why don't you just use like a AWD S3 or something like that? They're loads better. Haldex systems are really good. Tried and tested. You're an idiot. Oh my God, why would you destroy a classic car like a Nova? You're such an idiot. Like, what are you doing with your life? Sort yourself out. Right, I know what you're saying. Hear me out here, guys. Yes, there is better systems. I completely get it. But I want to build this car as Vauxhall probably would have. So the biggest issues with these transfer boxes, or the four-wheel drive system, shall we say, is the transfer box. And this transfer box has been stripped and it's been locked. So the biggest problem has been solved. Yes, you do hear of a few other things. They're not as strong as newer stuff. I get it. I completely get it. But this still incorporates traditional Vauxhall stuff. It's still going to be kind of an Nova. If I use an Evo floor pan, which I will say is very expensive, like we're talking probably 10 grand for an Evo to buy just to strip. By the time I've used an Evo floor pan gearbox, I might as well use the Evo engine. I might as well just use the Evo in the first place. I don't need an Nova, do I? If I use the Haldex system, it's very much the same. Yes, they are a little bit cheaper. You can get them the more readily available. But unless I put the C20 LET engine on the Volkswagen gearbox, it's just not going to be much of a Vauxhall, is it? And even if I do that, it's still going to be predominantly Golf-based or Audi S3 based, whatever. I don't want that. I want this to be basically a Nova with a four-wheel drive back axle, bit of a tunnel made if I need to, and like I say, predominantly Vauxhall. So it's kind of like an age-appropriate mod. Yeah, it's not the best stuff in the world, I know that, but this is going to be a light car. It's not going to get a lot of use, and I'm pretty confident it's going to be okay. And if it's not, I'll sort it. Don't you worry. Right, it's been a long time coming, so let's make a start. Right, first thing I want to stress is I want this to still look like a standard-ish Nova. So I want it to be the standard width. Now, a Calibra or a Cavalier is much wider than a Nova, about 100 mil. So that is my first problem. I need to make the back axle shorter. So with the tyres fitted and the wheels on, shall I say, I've strapped these pieces of wood either side so it's nice and parallel. And then I can measure between. And as it stands, the Nova is 148.2 centimetres. So that's with the tyre nearly touching the inner wheel arcs. Now my plan is, because the boot floor on this car is a bit crusty, it's a bit rotten in places, I'm not happy with any of the chassis legs, they're in bad condition, I'm going to cut the lot out and make new and start again. Make it exactly how I want it. I'm not going to use a Calibra setup, I'm not going to use a Nova setup, I'm going to make my own, make it nice and strong, and hopefully I'm going to make it look fairly factory looking. So I've been looking at the axle, and as you can see, I've got two. Now, one's off a Cav Turbo, one's off a GSI 4x4. So one's an F20 setup and one's an F28 setup. Now, from what I've gathered, pretty much everything's the same anyway, but one's 5-stud, one's 4-stud. So we're going to be using the 5-stud setup. Keeping with the 5-stud, I've done a quick mod on this back axle to make it a bit narrower. And with the wheels on, now bearing in mind these are 7-inch wheels, same offset but 7-inch wheels, so in theory it should be even bigger. I've got it to 148 centimetres, exactly the same as what my Nova is currently. You might be wondering, how have you done that so easily, Dan? Well, I'm going to show you. So what I've basically done is I've unbolted the arms from the original mounting brackets, which is here, and then moved it to the other side. And that pretty much takes it exactly where it needs to be. Now, obviously, that is not going to work. I can't keep it like that. There's lots of problems straight away. So what I plan to do, I'm going to make another tab out of maybe some 4 or 5mm steel, go on this side to bolt it up properly. I then need to trim this bit away because that's obviously going to foul, reinforce this side to make it stronger. Then I can cut all this off because this won't actually fit between the sills, so that needs cutting down anyway. But then we have a problem with the centre. Now the prop shaft won't fit between here. That's my next issue. But I've got a solution for that as well. So once that bracket is done on the other side, what I'm going to do, I'm going to brace this side. So I'm basically just going to weld some box section to this and to the subframe bit. And then I can cut this off and then I can remount this in its original place and reattach it to the arm. I'm going to brace it up, make it nice and strong. And that is going to basically make the space in between there exactly as it was before, but pull the axle in to exactly the same width as the standard Nova axle. So straight away, that sorted a lot of my issues. Obviously, I do need to make the arm smaller, but sorted a lot of the issues. The next problem I'm going to have is the diff's going to need moving back slightly because the arms are slightly further back. And the drive shafts are obviously going to need shortening. Now, I might look into getting some custom one made. I do have 3 sets. I'm going to basically strip them, have a look, see what I can do with them. But I'm not worried about that. I'm not worried about any of this, to be fair. So once all this is cut down, shortened, and then try and graft it onto the back end of my car. Now, the other issue I've got is where this is going to mount, and bearing in mind I'm not going to use any of the factory mounts because I don't like them. They're not very good, not happy with them, so I'm going to make it completely different really. But the mounts are still going to be exactly where the fuel tank needs to be. Now, if you look at a cab turbo or a Calibra turbo, the fuel tank is in a different location to where it would be on a Nova Lear. Fuel tank's actually at the back behind the bumper. I don't like that because if you have a rear ender, it could go wrong. So I'm going to have to reassess that. I might put something in the boot. I'm not really sure, but I don't want it underneath at the back. I'm definitely not going to have space for a spare wheel. It is what it is. So, shall I get the grinder out? Right, so I've just made this paper template, which is basically going to be a bracket for here. So I need to transfer this to steel. It's basically a copy of the original, but I'm going to make it out of thicker steel. So I'll weld it on like that, obviously drill a hole for the bush bolt, and then I'm also going to triangulate this edge a little bit to make it stronger, similar to how the original is, but it will probably be stronger than the original once I'm done. So that's the plan. So draw around the template using a Sharpie on a bit of steel, and then use an angle grinder with a 1mm cutting disc to cut it out. Now there is better ways of doing this. Obviously a laser cut would be fantastic. But obviously I don't have access to that kind of tooling, so a grinder will do for now. Once I get it to roughly the right shape, I then shape it using a grinder and a grinding disc, followed by the bench grinder. And there we go, one made bracket. I then cut down and trim back some of the original triangulation from the existing bracket, which I'll no longer be using, and clean up the axle ready for the new mounting bracket. I mark where the hole needs to be using a centre punch and then drill this hole out using a 12mm drill bit. Now when I drill it, I do use plenty of oil to keep the drill bit from getting too hot. That's just a little tip from me. And I transfer the bracket back to the subframe, line it up and weld it into place. Then I add a bit of triangulation just to make it stronger and weld it all up, and don't that look factory already? Right, so as you can see, that is one bracket done. Now obviously this needs cutting off here and I need to cut this down because like I said earlier, that's not going to fit between the sills. But that's a very good start. I've reinforced it with a bit of triangulation here and I think it looks alright. I've also trimmed away this. Next job is to move on to this side. So like I said earlier, what I'm going to do, I'm going to brace this arm to the subframe and I can cut this bit off, put this back into the factory position, which is under here, hold it up tight and obviously join it back up here somewhere. It's not going to be that easy because obviously the taper of it, it'd be easier if it was like parallel, but it's not. So we're just going to turn it around and see what we can do. So start by cleaning up both the arm and subframe, and I get a bit of scrap steel out of the scrap bin and just weld it into place. This is literally there just to hold everything lined up. Obviously one side's already bolted, so then I can cut the other side out. So I use a cutting disc and a hacksaw to cut the arm and then pull it out, transfer it to the vise. Now again, I look in the scrap bin and I find some 50mm box section that after a little bit of persuasion, I can make fit one end. Now obviously this isn't going to look prettiest, so I'm not going to leave it like this. But for now, I'm just going to tack it into place and connect the two back up. So as you can see, I've shaped the box section a little bit and I've welded it on and ground the top off. So this isn't finished. I'm now going to dress it with some 2mm sheet. I'm going to try and match the original profile and follow it around so it looks fairly factory and weld it into place. So I use a hammer and a big chisel just to try and get it roughly in the right kind of shape. It's amazing what you can do with limited tools. I then tack it on and beat it as I go along just to try and finish that shape off. Right, so it's been a couple of days since I've done any filming. We've got a couple of things to do. So I want to take the arm out and take the drive shaft out. And also I'm going to ask you guys, if you like the footage so far, please like the video and please subscribe to the channel. It helps the algorithm, helps everything, helps me continue doing things like this for you guys. So if you do enjoy it, please support us. Right, I'm going to pull this part now. Hopefully it's going to come apart okay. And then we'll weld the other side up. So the drive shafts are held in with 6 8mm Allen key headed bolts. And as you can imagine, they caused me some problems. So 5 of them came out, the last one didn't. The head rounded off, despite me hitting it several times with a hammer. So what I had to do was weld a bolt in, which failed on the first attempt because it snapped. But basically weld a bolt over the original head, get the heat into it, and then eventually it came out. I then cut off the brace and removed the arm. I then straightened everything out a little bit and continued doing exactly the same on the other side. I panel beated another bit of metal just to try and match the original profile and fill it all in and make it look as factory as possible. I then welded it all up solid using plenty of heat to make sure there was lots of good penetration. Once all welded up, I pull the arm outside and grind it all back with a grinding disc followed by a flat disc. Now this does a much better job than a grinding disc and gives a much better, smoother finish. So I finished both arms. I did the other one off camera because it's basically repeating it. So these arms have been made shorter than standard. These are Cavalier rear arms. Basically I made it shorter so I can make the car narrower and I can make it the standard width with the bigger wheels. So from the outside it's going to look original. And exactly the same for the subframe. So I've moved the outer bracket inwards. I've made some new ones. So basically I think from memory it's pulled the arms in 70mm aside, so 140mm overall, which will allow me to run nice big wheels on the standard width. Obviously we still need drive shafts and this subframe still isn't going to fit, so I need to cut this down still. Across here for example, I'm going to cut these mounts off and then start making my own. I've also been buying a few bits. So I bought this transfer box. Now this is off a really rare Calibra 4x4 naturally aspirated, not a turbo. So it's the same as what I've already got. So I've got a spare one of these now because I've got 2 gearboxes, 2 axles, 2 transfer boxes, 2 props, 3 sets of drive shafts. So I should be okay on that front. And I've bought a set of gear cables out of a modern Aston J, I think it was, 1.4. These are the 5-speed ones and the selector, as well as I bought an F17 gearbox out of a Vectra just to nick the linkage bit off. And this bracket, which I don't think I'm going to be using, but I can use it to mock up something else because my gearbox don't have the holes for these. So this is still physically too wide to fit in a Nova, even though I've shortened where these go. I still need to shorten the entire thing. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to lock the ends off here and here. And I'm also going to cut these mounts off here, but I'm going to leave a little bit of material just so I've got a bit of a reference point because I'm going to make some new rubber mounted brackets which go on this. But just something a little bit smaller because I think they're overkill. And that's it. Right, let's get the grinder out. So the subframe must be at least 3 or 4mm thick. And if I'm honest, I made this look quite easy on this time lapse. It took me absolutely ages to cut it off. I went through loads of cutting discs and loads of grinding discs, grinding all the weld off afterwards. And in the end, I decided to actually lop off all the original mount and I'm just going to make completely new stuff. Right, now the end's cut off, I need to plug the hole up somehow. So I use a hole saw and cut a little bit of steel out, which is 2mm thick, just to plug the end up, similar to how Vauxhall did back in the day. Dress it on a bench grinder and weld it into place with the MIG welder. Now it just so happened that I had the perfect size hole saw, which made this job a lot easier. And there we go, that's one side all done and looking kind of factory once again. Right, so it's 24 hours later, I've had a haircut and the subframe is pretty much done now. So I've cut both sides down, I've blanked the holes up, and I've also triangulated the brackets on both sides just to give it a bit of extra strength really. So I'm going to take the original back axle off, the fuel tank, exhaust, and just start having a look, see how I'm going to fit it. First things first, let's remove the wheels. So straight away with the wheel off, this is going to be one of my first problems. Now, standard wheel arch isn't in bad condition. It has been repaired. A couple of years ago I did repair it, there's a video of that. And it looks pretty good in here. However, the wheels I'm using are 1 inch wider than this, and basically the outside of the wheel is going to be in exactly the same place. So that means that we need to go at least 1 inch further in. And that 6-inch wheel was very close to this. So this has got to go. This inner arch has got to go. And to be fair, like I say, I've welded it up in the past. The repair's done okay, but there's bits I'm not happy with. So it gives me a good opportunity to cut all the original rot out and just start again. Then I take the full exhaust off, followed by cracking off all the brake hoses, disconnecting the brake lines, followed by the handbrake cable. Now this needs slackening off first, a little bit fiddly, but it does come off eventually. Luckily the cable's not that old. I unbolt the lower shock mounts, let the axle drop down. Now there is some weight on the axle, I've put the stand underneath it, and I can drop it down, pull the springs out, and unbolt 2 M10 retaining bolts for the axle. Then it's just a case of dropping the transmission stand with the axle on it and pulling it out of the way. So now the axle's off, the next job is the fuel tank. Now, I think there's a bit of fuel in this, so this could be a pain and I might get wet, but we're going to try our best. As there is some fuel in it, I decide to take the fuel neck off first and then drain it into a large funnel into a couple of petrol cans. I drain the fuel filter off and I use the transmissions once again just to support the fuel tank. So I can take the straps off, followed by the fuel lines and the breather, and then it's just a case of wiggling it out the way and dropping it down. I then put the modified axle onto the transmission stand and lift it up. Now this transmission stand has made the job so much easier, and it was literally only £85 off eBay. So I'd recommend one. So straight away we've got some issues. So this needs to be much further forward because as you can see the wheels are far too far back. The spare wheel well is completely in the way, that's got to go. That's stopping the diff housing going in the right place. But yeah, it looks like it's definitely doable. This now fits between the sills, which is perfect. So I think what we're going to do now is start cutting. So I'm going to cut the spare wheel well out, and then I'm going to start trimming the chassis legs back. Now the back chassis legs can completely go for me. I'm not bothered about them, but I kind of want to keep them from about here. We'll see what they look like. I'm going to clean them back. If they're rusty, then they can go. If they're all right, then I'll leave them. But we'll see what they're like, and we'll start mocking some stuff up. So now it's got a lot of weight removed. The back end is very light on lift, and I don't want it to fall off. So I'm just putting a ratchet strap around the quarters to hold it onto lift arms. So there we go. That's all stripped now, as you can see. And for those who think this is sacrilege doing this to such a good SR, this is one of the reasons I'm doing it. If you look in this boot, it's not very tidy. It's had loads of bad repairs, and generally it's just not good. So I'm not happy with any of the back end. I'm not happy with the back arches. So all this can go, and I can make it much nicer, I hope. So I'm going to start by cutting all this boot section out here, just the spare wheel well area. I'm going to do it loosely and quick, just so I can get it gone and see what I'm working with. Right, let's carry on. So the original plan was just to remove the boot floor and use a steel ruler to make a nice straight square edge, something I can butt up to later down the line. So I'll start by doing that. As it's only thin metal, the 4.5 inch grinder makes light work of it, and before we know it, it's out. The chassis legs, however, are a little bit more difficult as they're much thicker and much wider. So out comes the 9 inch grinder. I don't use this very often. If I'm honest, it's a bit scary, but it does make the job much easier. So to start with, I just do rough cuts. The whole idea of this is just to remove the material. I can then neaten it up later down the line, but I just want to make the space to start off with. So there we go, one chassis leg kind of roughly cut out. Obviously I'm going to trim it back much more than that, but I just want to show you this. So look at all this hidden rust. So back panel rotten, end of the chassis leg rotten. It's been repaired before, looked okay on the outside. In here, again, loads of rust. In here, loads of rust. I mean, yeah, it's solid enough. It's not going anywhere yet, but you know, another 20 years time, what's it going to be like there? Back panel again, look, rotten there. So my plan is I'm going to cut it kind of down here. I want to keep this bit of the floor section. So I reckon I'm going to kind of cut roughly around there. So it's a bit scabby there, but I think the sides aren't too bad. And then just go from there, see what we're working with. Obviously I still need to trim this right back. But yeah, you get the idea. So I used some silver aerosol I had laying around just to roughly mark the inner arch. Then I go over the top of it with some Sharpie. This just makes it a bit easier to see because obviously it's black paint and Sharpie doesn't show up too well on that. I trim the arch right back and then start removing the front of the chassis leg. Now I didn't want to do this, however it wasn't in very good condition, so off it came. So I decided to take the whole rear chassis leg off. Now the reason for that is it was scabby on this inside here. You can see it there, there's still a bit left. And I'm just not happy with that. I don't want it to be rusty, I want it to be perfect. So I'm going to cut all this away. And then I'm going to put a whole new cross member across like that. And if you look down here, you'll see a lot more of the rust. That's the inside of the bit I've just cut off, and as you can see, it's pretty scabby. Yes, it's still very strong, it's still very thick, as you can see. However, I just don't want it. We can do better. So it's done. Right, so it's a couple of days later, but I have been working behind the scenes. Now, both chassis legs have been removed, as well as both inner rear arches. So I've removed the legs right up to the inner sills, and my plan is to start making a cross member what goes across now, which I can attach to the front of the axle to. Right, cross member wise, we've got some 100 by 50mm box sections, 3mm thick, and it's going to weld on top of the inner sill where the original bracket was, where it would have welded to the chassis leg. So this is going to fit here perfectly, I hope. Like so. So I hope this is nice and clear for you, but as you can see, it's sat on top of the original mounting point. So it fits there really nice. It's also in line with the tunnel perfectly. So my plan is I'm not just going to weld it on like that. I'm going to weld a plate across the back here. We're just going to spot weld to the inner floor bit all the way across using some 2mm, so that's nice and thick as well. We're going to spot weld it here like it would be originally, or shall I say plug weld it. And then I'm going to make a template out of cardboard, and then I'm going to box this in again using some 2mm. So that's going to be proper square and proper solid. But before I do all that, I want to do some more prep. So what I want to do is put loads of captive nuts on this. So I want 2 M10 captive nuts to hold the front of the subframe. And I also want a selection of M8 captive nuts. Now the M8s will be for things like fuel pipe clips, handbrake cable mounts, exhaust mounts, anything like that. So I'm just going to put a selection through roughly where I think they're going to need to be, and hopefully they'll come in handy. If I don't use them, I don't use them, but in the future I will have something to bolt something to should I need to. Right, so I'm going to quickly put the subframe back into position, mark the subframe roughly where I'm going to want to mount it. Then I can take it all off, mark it all up properly, drill the holes and do all the fabrication off the car. Out comes the stand once again, and I jack it back up into roughly the right place. Obviously not perfect, just roughly, so I can mark the cross member. I then use a set square, a Sharpie and a ruler just to get all my measurements bang on in the right place. So as I said earlier, we've got 2 M10s and 4 M8s. So the M8s are just going to be for random things. Might not even use them, but I thought I'd rather have them there than not have them at all. I then pre-drill the backside of the cross member and use a £1.50 Temu hole saw to cut some big holes in the back. Now I've done this so I can get the welder in, so I can weld the nuts in and make them nice and strong. Right, so holes are drilled, all cleaned up now. I've enlarged these to 8.5mm and 10.5mm for the end, which is the correct size for a 10mm bolt and an 8mm bolt. Right, now I need to weld the nuts on. So what I'm doing, I'm literally putting a bolt through with a nut on the other side. I've cleaned the nut up, just hold it in place, and I can weld it into place. Now these are obviously going to be a captive nut, so I'm just going to put a bit of weld around them. It doesn't have to be too much, but just a bit so they don't break off in the future. And that's it. So these holes are hopefully going to help with that. So I'm just using standard nuts, but what I'd always recommend doing is cleaning off the BZP coating, which is bright zinc plating from memory. This just helps with penetration and stops it splattering to start off with. Another top tip is to bolt the nut in using just a normal bolt from the reverse side. This does two things. A, it holds the nut in place while you weld it, and B, it stops welding splatter going inside the threads. Right, next job, I've made these little strips, which are basically going to weld to the bottom of the cross member here, and then spot weld to this bit of floor panel. So I need to mark these and then weld them on. So yeah, these basically need marking and tacking into place now. So once marked, I use some magnets to hold everything into place, tack the back, and I weld the front. Now I don't do continuous seams, I just do little stitches because that's how a rally car would be, and it looks cool. Yes, technically it should be a continuous seam, however I think this is going to be more than strong enough. I then spot weld it onto the car, making it nice and tight using a bit of wood and a pry bar just to prise it into the right place. For now it's only welded onto the original inner sill part because the interior still needs stripping properly. Right, so I've had 4 sleeves made. Now these are to house poly bushes. I was going to solid mount the axle, but I've decided to poly bush it. It's got a bit of flexibility in it. It's not solid, but it's fairly solid, and it should do the job quite nicely. I've welded, just tacked a couple of M10 penny washers on to act as the bush, so then we can start making the rest of the mounts up. So not ideal, but it will do for today. So this is essentially going to bolt into here. Just like that. Right, so what I've done, I've just put a 4.5mm spacer on top of this bush, which is the thickness of the poly bush for when it arrives, just to make sure everything's bang on. Next job, I need to somehow get the axle into place, get it bang on square, and then make the brackets. And I've got to do that by myself somehow, and I don't want the car to be banana when we're finished. So this could be challenging. Wish me luck. Right, so the next problem, and it's quite a big one, is if I put the axle where I think it needs to be, it's touching this. Now I can have it lower, obviously the arms are adjustable, but I don't really want the arm angle like up here. So I want good, well, not a lot of arch clearance here if I'm honest. I want good arch clearance in the sense that I don't want it to look like it's a monster truck. So I don't want to cut this out really, I want it to retain this. However, for it to work, I can't see a way around it. So I'm going to cut this off now. And I guess if it was going to be easy, everyone would do, wouldn't they? So here's what it is. Let's get cutting. This is exactly the same process as the inner arch. Bit of silver paint, and then use a straight edge with a Sharpie to mark it. Followed by 4.5-inch grinders to cut it out. Right, let's lift the axle back up again. I'm getting good at this. Now I would say that was more like it. We've got roughly a 10cm gap there and a 10cm gap there. Now it's probably a bit hard to see on camera, but I don't think that looks too bad. I think, imagine the tyre is going to be about here. I think that's good. I'd rather it be able to go super low than not be able to go low at all. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with that, I think. Right, so that is roughly in the right place, which sounds rough, I know, because I want it perfect. But hear me out here. What I'm going to do, I'm going to make a bracket for this side. Yeah, now I've got this side pretty much in the right place, and so is the other side. It all measures okay with a tape measure. So if I make a bracket for this, then this side's fixed. I'm only just going to tack it in place, but this side's fixed then. Then the other side, I can get bang on with this side, and I can do some corner measurements, all that kind of stuff, make sure everything looks spot on before I weld it up properly. So that's my plan. So if you haven't seen Binky, this is CAD, Cardboard Aided Design. So it's a bit of old card out the scrap bin I'm using to make a template up for the steel bracket. So I cut it out, make it a perfect fit, and then transfer that to some steel and cut it out using a grinder. Sorry, space is a bit tight here, but there we go. We have 4 plates, 2 for the top, 2 for bottom. Hope you can see them. So I'm going to do this side first, and then move that side, measure it up, and tack it all into place. I was actually really pleased with how well these actually turned out. So I started off by tacking the smaller piece in, then the larger piece. Now I do box this in later, but for now it's just tacked into place so I can jig it all up, make sure the measurements are right. Right, so it's tacked up and I've used some string just to measure everything, and it seems okay. Now obviously I've never done anything like this before. I didn't know how to measure. I thought string would be the best bet, so I've measured diagonals, various points, and just try my best to try and make sure everything's kind of straight. It looks it, I think it's okay, but I'm never going to really know until I drive it down the road. But the beauty I do have here is I'm using 12mm ID bushes, so the inside diameter is 12mm, and I'm using 10mm bolts. Now the reason I've done that is because if it isn't bang on, I'll be able to move the axle slightly, and 2mm that end, by the time it gets to this end, is a massive amount. It's probably going to be, I don't know, half an inch or something. So that should do me. Fingers crossed it's okay. I'm pretty confident now, so I think I'm going to start welding it up properly. Now because I centered the cross member and all the bolt holes are centered and everything's true to where it should be, and I made the brackets a mirror image of each other, this wasn't actually that bad to do. It surprised me. I thought it'd be really hard to line up, but yeah, really wasn't that bad. So once everything was tacked, I pulled the axle back down, welded everything up properly and boxed it all in, and finished by grinding it all down and flat disking it. And don't that look professional? Really pleased with that. Right, finally I put a stud in the cross member and lift the axle back into place. It's a little bit awkward to do by myself again, But once it was in, I then put a bolt back in where the stud should be, bolted both sides up, and then refitted the diff. So there we go, that is the subframe mounted. Now I do have another problem. Obviously I want this as high up as possible so the car can be nice and low but still have decent suspension travel. So my next problem is the prop shaft. Now it needs to go in the end of the diff and that needs to be nice and straight. And currently it can't physically do that because I've got the diff so high. Now the traditional Cavalier or Calibra uses this kind of suspension on the back. So it's got a spring on the wishbone and a shock absorber on the wishbone. This bolts at the bottom and then goes through into the floor, and that's it. Quite simple. They work, but something like this is going to be a lot better. Now this is just a cheap eBay special coilover. What's good about it is, obviously the spring is adjustable, so you can adjust the preload. It's got 12 different dampening settings, but also, which I really do like, and you don't see this on the European one so much, you can adjust the bottom, so you can adjust the height essentially without changing the preload on the spring. So you still get the adequate amount of dampening travel. You're not compromising on anything like that, and the spring preload's still the same. So I really like that, and it's got a few inches of adjustment, so that's going to help me. So obviously this lot doesn't just fit. It doesn't fit at all if I'm honest. So we're going to have to make it work. And as we've got all this massive space, that shouldn't be too difficult, I'm hoping. So let's crack on with it. So I've been having a bit of a play, and I think the shock absorber needs to be mounted pretty much vertically. The reason for that is this, when it goes up, should compress nicely. Hope you can see that. I think if I try and put it like this kind of angle, it might try and bend the shock, and it's also going to interfere with the drive shaft. So from looking at it, I think pretty much horizontal should do the job nicely. So how am I going to mount it? Well, my plan is I'm going to reinforce this section here on both sides exactly the same. Now this bit here on both sides is symmetrical. As you go further forward, it gets slightly different because there's a fuel neck on the other side, but this bit's bang on. So because I want this horizontal, I'm going to reinforce this with some 2mm plate. Then I'm going to bring basically a channel coming off here, which is going to act as my top. And then I've got, believe it or not, a Mark 7 transit wheel arch to then fill the gap up. Now, that might sound a bit hard to understand, so I'm just going to show you. So funnily enough, when I eBay searched for Vauxhall Nova, it turns out transit arches and Land Rover Discovery boot floors actually fit these cars, which I was really surprised about. So I've got some of them bought. Anyway, how did I fit everything? Well, I started off by cutting this little bit of panel out here and then reinforcing it with some 2mm. Now the plate's a bit old and rusty, so I decided I'd just give it a sand first and then a coat of X primer just to protect it. I also gave the backside some gloss paint as well. So once dry, I welded it into place after doing a little bit of panel beating and cleaning up first. I tagged it in to start off with, then I buzzed it all up properly. Then I gave it a good grind down and a coat of X primer. Right, now that's all done, next job I need to make some kind of channel what comes out of here. So I was looking through the scrap bin and I found this, which I've just trimmed the edge off and just tidied it up a little bit. That is a 5-inch channel, which is exactly what I need really. So that should bolt through there like so. Obviously this isn't going to be the final thing, it's going to need reinforcement a lot more than this, but you get the idea. So this needs quite a lot of work to transform it from a bit of scrap to a turret strut tower. So start off by marking it exactly where I need it to be cut with a permanent marker and a set square, and then I also mark where the strut's going to be and the hole centres, etc, etc, and where the hole needs to be for the centre of the strut. I take quite a lot of time doing this because I want it to be absolutely perfect. And then I use a centre punch on the marks and drill the holes out. Drill a 50mm hole in the middle and then two 8.5mm holes. And once that's all done, I dress it all down with a flap disc on a grinder and a drill and go over the whole thing with a file. I then cut the end off with a grinder to the exact length I want it to be. So there we go, it fits absolutely lovely. So I bolt it up tight, and as you can see, the bent over piece I'd already drilled some holes in. I use these to plug weld it to the metal plate I've already welded to the chassis, and then I seam weld down the side. Finally, I stitch weld all the way around it. Now this is like an inch weld, inch gap, inch weld. What they're doing rally cars, and the idea is it allows the metal to flex. Next up, rear panel. Now this rear panel is rotten, and as you can imagine, it isn't going to work with my Land Rover Discovery floor and my transit wheel arches. So I need to remove it, get it out of the way because it's not very nice, it's a bit nasty. So I cut it all out with a grinder and look at all this rust. It's in really poor condition, one of the worst bits of the car. Obviously it doesn't add that much strength anyway, so I've never been that bothered about it, but I'm very pleased it's going. I then trim back a bit more of the original inner arch and weld on another piece of angle iron, the strut tower. As you can see, I've cut this at a certain angle, so it doesn't fit parallel with the strut. However, it does fit vertically, which is what I want, and I think that's going to look more aesthetically pleasing once it's all done. Next job's the transit wheel arch. Now this is a Mark 7 transit wheel arch. They all look pretty similar if I'm honest, but I found the dimensions of this is going to work quite well on the Nova, and it's going to give me plenty of tyre spaces, which is what I want. To start off with, I measure it all up, mark it, and then cut it to size roughly. And I also trim a little bit more off the car so it fits in. Once I'm happy with the rough fitment, I make up a panel, which is essentially going to follow the original shape of the Nova arch and then join up to the transit arch. Because obviously the transit arch is like a hexagon, essentially, a half hexagon. Nova arch is round. So this is going to allow me to fill that gap in. It's also going to give me something to plug weld the arch to. I clean the body up, mark up where the arch needs to be, and then tack the panel into place. I then make a little filling panel for this little piece of corner because the profile of the arch means it's just going to skim that. We don't want any holes. So I weld it all up, grind it all flat with a grinder and a flat disc, and that looks loads better and it's already a lot stronger. The next job was to make a little lip that the arch could spot weld onto. Now, reason for this is I think it makes it stronger, it looks a little bit more factory, and it's going to give the whole thing a bit more rigidity. So what I do, I use some 2mm plate once again and then bend it to match the profile, the curve shall we say, and tack it into place. Then buzz it all up and away we go. So that is the rear arch done, and I think it looks pretty good if I'm honest. I'm pretty chuffed with it. Obviously I've still got a lot more to do, so we need to put a chassis leg down here which is going to tie this turret tower into the back panel. I'm also going to put a cross member across here which is going to act as a bit of a lower strut brace, but it's also got to hold the back of the diff. So that's going to give it a lot of strength, that is. But for now, I'm going to carry on with the front of the arch. The first thing I need to do is start filling this section in here. So whenever we make templates, we use CAD, which is Cardboard Aided Design. So I've got a bit of scrap cardboard out of the recycling bin, and I mark it with Sharpie. Cut it all out, and then we transfer it to the steel. Finally, I cut this out with a 1mm cutting disc, then clean it all up with a flat disc. And there we go, perfect fit, first time, just the way we like it. Now let's tack it into place. So some people are going to say this isn't going to be strong enough, and I think it is. It's 2mm thick, which is the thickness of most strut towers. It's also going to have a solid cross member mounted to it, chassis legs, as well as a big strut brace. So here's the other bit of the transit arch. Now obviously I do not need it to be that big, so I'm going to trim it down a little bit. And the beauty of that is as well, I can remove the Ford badge, as you can see there. I don't think you purists are going to like that, are you? So I mark it all up and cut roughly 5 or 6 inches out of the centre. This gets rid of the Ford badge and also makes it about the right length that it would have been originally, taking into account the strut tower. I then use a spirit level to mark a perfect level line on the bottom of the turret. Now this is to line up with the bottom of the wheel arch. Now the reason I'm doing that is because, see, the wheel arch is cut in half, and I want this to remain true all the way through. So I don't want it to be leaning up one side, for example. So I want a nice level line so I can line both sides up with it, make it fit just right. I then make a front infill panel similar to the rear one, so this follows the profile of the Nova arch and the profile of the transit arch. I weld it to the Nova arch, so then I can spot weld the new transit arch onto it. Again, I treat up the back before I do this to stop it rusting. I then spend quite a long time with some 60 grit sanding down the turret tower. Yes, it is flexing a little bit, do not worry, it's not going to flex when it's welded to the arches. That looks loads better, doesn't it? And with the arch clamped into place, and I'm not going to weld them yet because I want to make sure the chassis legs are made first. So there we go, that's an S13 rear coilover mounted custom turret transit wheel arches in a Vauxhall Nova. Obviously it's not completely finished, I still need to spot weld these on, still need to make a lip on this side like I did here, but you get the idea. So before I do anything else, I need to lower this down. So initially I've bought some spacers to space it down the right amount. I think in future though, I might remake the cross member slightly, who knows, but for now we're going to use the spacers. But believe it or not, before I start doing any of that, I want to do something which might seem completely irrelevant, and that is refurbish the wheels. Now the wheels are in a pretty poor state, been blasted, and yeah, they're just not very good. The blasting's really picked the wheels, so I need to spend quite a lot of time rubbing them down and making them as good as I can. Now the reason I'm doing this now and not later is the tyre size is quite a lot bigger than most people run on Novas, and I want to make sure it's going to fit. I'm pretty confident they will, or I'm pretty confident I can make them fit, but I just want to have them for peace of mind, so when I'm mocking it all up, I know they fit. So yeah, I could just get the tyres fitted, however I thought there's no point in doing a job twice, so I might as well get the wheels painted first and then fit the tyres and then they're done. Obviously I'm going to have to keep them safe, but I would do anyway. So like most things, I like to do as much as possible in-house, which is why I've decided to refurb these myself. Yes, I could have paid someone. If I'm honest, these took me 8 hours to do in total, which is a very long time, and it probably would have been cheaper to send them somewhere else, but hey ho, that's life. I'd rather do them myself. They've come out pretty good overall, I think. Let me know what you think in the comments. Right, now the wheels are done, back on with the axle. So we're going to lower this down. So when I first fitted the axle, I was very conscious of mounting it as high as possible so I could have the maximum amount of suspension travel but still have it really low. Obviously I did that, but I did it a bit too well. I didn't consider the pop shaft angle. Now a couple of people pointed this out, and yes, I made a massive mistake. So that's why I'm fitting these spacers, which will hopefully eliminate that, and in the future I'll make something a little bit better. So the first bit is to make a bit of chassis leg what goes from here to here and box this in. Nice and simple. So I'll just tape this tyre lever in here just to make sure the spacing is even, because obviously if it does flex around a little bit, then I can accurately measure across and fill it in. So you've probably noticed, but I use all the basic tools to do a lot of my work. So this is just a normal tape measure, normal set square and a Sharpie and an angle grinder. I don't have anything too fancy, but I find you get really good results and you don't need all this fancy specialist equipment. My advice, if you're going to do anything like this, is do little bits at a time, try and plan everything the best you can in your head or on paper, even better, and just enjoy yourself. And like I say, don't do too much at once because you might overwhelm yourself. Right, now the rear of the chassis legs in, I'm going to fill this section in here. So I'm going to put the inner arch back in, I'm going to make a template. Don't worry about this rot, that's getting removed at some point. Obviously I'm going to replace the whole quarter panel, so don't worry about that, but I need to make it good from there to here, and that's going to box it all in and make it nice and strong. I clamp the arch back in, and then I use a bit of cardboard and a Sharpie to design and make my template. Once I'm happy with the fit, I transfer the design onto a sheet of steel and then cut it out with a grinder and clean it all up with a flat disc. So now we just need to fold these edges over here, and that's going to tack up nicely. Again, other than having a decent welder and some very basic metalwork tools, I don't have anything big. So when it comes to folding steel, I tend just to use a vise. It works quite well if you're careful. Beautiful. Excuse the sweat, it's very hot in here. This is going to get plug welded on, which is essentially drill a load of holes in and weld through. A little bit like a spot weld. It looks a bit like a spot weld once it's done. It's kind of a factory approved repair method. And for this kind of application, I think that's perfect. Now to drill the holes, I'm just using a jugular, which is like a little punch. And it basically just stamps a hole through it. Show you. Just like so. It's a bit easier than drilling it. It's a little bit quicker. And on thin metal like this, it works really well. Now that all the holes are pressed in, it's finally time to weld on the arch. So I literally just weld through on a fairly low heat setting into the metal behind it, and then clean it all back with a grinder. So there you go, that's the rear section welded on, clean back, and I put a bit of primer on the loose metal. A little bit of filler here and there, it's going to look great, and obviously I'm going to put some seam seal around it all. So yeah, just to look them after, very factory looking, nice and strong, perfect. Right, let's continue with the front arch. And for those that are interested, the tyres are now being fitted. Now these are 205, 45, 16 Uniroyal Rain Sport 5s, and from experience a really good tyre in the wet and in the dry. Obviously this is mainly going to be a dry car, but they've got really good grip and they're not too badly priced. Right, now the wheels on, I've just taken the spring off, so it's just got the damper, just to show you what we're working with at the minute. So this is set relatively low, I guess, but that's all the way down, and that is the suspension all the way up. So obviously I wouldn't be driving it there, but I can still raise the bottom coilover mount another 2 or 3 inches. So in theory, I can have it running like that all the time, and I've still got plenty of space at the top of the wheel arch to have the wheel probably even here, which obviously not going to do. That just demonstrates how much room we've got now compared to a standard vehicle. Now, bearing in mind, these are 205, not 195s, these are 205, so they're much wider than standard. Yeah, really chuffed with that. So I've just cut out even more of my mint Nova SR. Haters going to hate. I've cut this little bit of box section, which is going to be a chassis leg from here, and it's going to join up about here. So what I'm planning on doing is just tack it into place. I'll get it as level as I can, square as I can, tack it all in. Then this bit here where the cross member is, I'm going to box all that in with some 2mm. I'm also going to box this in just to make it nice and strong. It'll be far stronger than original, and it's not going to be that heavy, to be fair. So let's start mocking things up and tacking things into place. So when I first started doing YouTube, I aimed to get a video out every week. Now, more recently, it's been every 2 weeks. I've tried to get better quality videos out with more content, but unfortunately, because of that, it's every 2 weeks. Now, you've got to remember, I work full time and I also have a family. So I don't get loads of time in the garage, but I do try and make you guys some great quality content. So if you do enjoy it, please just hit the subscribe button and support the channel. Right, there we go. That is tacked into place. Now, I have put a slope on the chassis leg. Reason I've done that is because then it lines up with this better. I want to keep the original seat brackets, the front ones. I'm going to try and make some custom rear seats. I know the original ones aren't going to fit anywhere near. But I'm just going to try and make some just to make the car a little bit more practical. It might not work, but it's worth a go. So I'm pretty happy with that. Next thing I need to do is weld all this into place properly. I'm going to clean up the weld behind this and just start boxing it all in, I think. Again, like I did on the back, I think I'm going to use a little bit 2mm plate here. Just fill that bit in. And yeah, we'll go from there. So it's the next day. Chassis legs all welded up nicely. My plan is to fill this section in here, fill this section down here, and hopefully get the arch on. So to do this, I start by fitting the arch as a reference point. Now just clamp this into place. I'm going to use a piece of cardboard and a permanent marker to start making a template. Once I'm happy with the shape, I cut it all out and then I transfer that cardboard template to steel. So again, like a lot of the other stuff I've done, I've been using 2mm plate. Now it's a little bit more heavy duty than it needs to be, but at least I know it's going to be nice and strong, and it's a lot easier to weld. So once the plate is cut and I'm happy with it, I fit all the rest of the car, just clean a few edges up, make things fit a bit better, and then we can start welding it on. So my advice when welding any kind of sheet metal is to tack it all into place first, try and tack every corner, make sure everything lines up, and then start buzzing it up properly. Don't just go straight away into it with the buzz gun, because you will warp it all and it won't fit very well. So I weld the top side, grind it all flat, and then I put a couple of stitches on the other side just for a bit of extra strength. And then, unfortunately, we've run out of welding wire. So it's been a couple of days, but we have good news. The welding wire has now arrived. This now needs fitting, and I've made a cardboard template, which kind of goes in here like so, and it's going to fill that section in nicely, make it nice and strong. And after that's made out of steel, I'm going to put a piece in here all the way across, tie all this in and make it nice and strong. So before I cut out the steel, clean up the area, I'm going to weld everything to. Now I use a little belt sander for this. Now this is just an electric one. I think the 13mm wide belts, they are really good, but the belts don't last very long. The 20mm ones you use in a body shop are much better, but you only seem to find them air operated. Now I don't have a big compressor. So I cut the steel out and then transfer it to the vise to fold it. Now I don't have a fancy steel folder. I wish I did, but the vise does work quite well for smaller items, especially if you use a hammer to assist you. I test fit it, and as you can see, it fits perfectly. So I key it up with some sandpaper and then prime the back to stop it getting rusty. And then again, I put it back on, tack it into place, and then start welding it up properly. Now this is going to be really strong. It's really boxing the ceiling nicely, and it's going to add loads of strength to the rear end of the car once it's all finished. Finally, back onto the rear arch. Now the transit arch is very thin and it has loads of pressed swages in to make it a little bit stronger. Now one of them is unfortunately right in the way, so what I do is I panel beat it out the best I can using some basic tools, a couple of hammers and a bit of steel, make it as flat as possible. Doing this obviously makes the metal a little bit longer because you're stretching it. So then I retrim it to shape, I then cut a sliver of 2mm off and fold it to the right shape of the arch so I can weld it onto the turret, and then the transit arch will spot weld to that. I hope that makes sense. So that's it all done, dressed back and primed. I want to continue that on this side. So I basically want to duplicate what I've already done on this side. So start by trimming off the rest of the original floor. Now, I've said before, I didn't really need to cut this much out. There was quite a lot of rot on the back end of this car, so doing so is getting rid of one of the problems, I guess. Plus, I can make it a lot stronger and hopefully make it look pretty good too. Right, so now the other side's cut out, I want to measure this side, start marking up exactly where I want to fit the chassis leg on this side. Now, this could seem quite a daunting job, and I do understand that, but I'm kind of breaking it down into simple ways of doing things. So I'm just using literally a steel ruler and a tape measure to measure everything side by side, cross-reference things. I've got lots of points which I can measure from, which I know are set and solid. And then I take my time, marking everything up, measuring, marking, measuring, until I get it bang on in the right place, and then I'm happy. I did exactly the same thing on the outside, and as you can see here, there's the line where the two panels join. This is symmetrical on and over. I can measure exactly from there, and if I get it exactly to the mill, I know it's bang on perfect. So I cap the end of the chassis leg just like I did on the other side and weld it into place. So I just tack it on to start off with, just to make sure it's in exactly the right place. I recheck all the measurements and then I buzz it up properly. As you can see, I'm a bit dirty. I've had a couple of hours off camera making this because I didn't want to repeat myself. I made this in a previous episode. But this one I did slightly different because I made it on the floor. I didn't make it on the car. Now, what I've done, I've made an exact replica of this, but it's a mirror reverse of it, essentially. So, exactly the same, but opposite way around. So that's going to go on this side. I still need to drill a hole in the top, which we're going to do next. And there we go. That's the offside strut tower made and ready to be welded onto. Since I last did some filming, I have made these strut top plates. And that's them off. As you can see, they're 3mm thick, nice and sturdy, and they're going to really help reinforce it, hopefully. They've been cut out in the lathe, and they're basically designed to go on top of the strut tower, and I'm going to weld a strut brace to it. So I'm going to make a strut brace off this. So it's just a little bit of extra reinforcement. It's going to make the back end a little bit stronger, and just make the top of this a little bit stronger. So I have made them, cut them out, drilled them. Right, so where were we on the car? Well, this is all being cleaned back, dressed back. If you remember from the other side, I cut this bit out here and added some plate. Now, I wasn't 100% happy with the look of that. I keep looking at it thinking I can do better. So I'm going to cut this side out today, and I'm going to do it slightly differently. Instead of just having a plate go to here, I think I'm going to make it go to here to fill all this section in and make it look a bit neater. So this is the other side, and as you can see, it is nice and strong. This is going to be completely covered, so it doesn't really matter. But this is just bothering me this little bit. So I'm going to try and fill this section in, and when I do the other side, I'm going to do that from the start, I think. Right, let's get on with filling this in. So I start by tracing the rough shape onto a bit of old cardboard I found in the bin. Then I cut a bit out, make sure it fits, and keep tracing it until I'm happy with the fitment. This can be quite time consuming, but it's definitely worth doing properly because it will give you a much better finish. So there we go, I'm much happy with that now. It fits a lot better, follows all the contours nicely. I'm going to cut it out of 2mm steel, weld it all in. Then I'm going to repeat the process on the other side, but I'll just use the back piece because this is kind of already done. Smooth it in and try and make them look as similar as I can. I use the fine Sharpie to trace around the template, and then I cut it out roughly with an angle grinder and a 1mm cutting disc. And then the edges I go around with a grinding disc just to get the contours and the curves as close as I can. And there we go, one panel, 2mm thick. It kind of goes in. Something along the lines of that. As you can see, it fits around the contours nicely here. I'm just going to paddle beat this area here flat, just make it a bit easier for me. Yeah, happy with that. So 2mm thick steel is actually quite thick for sheet work. However, I'm using it because this is going to be a structural area. The strut top is going to be welded to this, and I need it to be nice and strong. I don't want it to flex. So there we go, that's cleaned up. I've panel beated this area flat. I've also painted the back of this area here with some primer. Drilled a couple of holes in it, drilled some holes in here so I can spot weld or plug weld it in. I'm going to let this dry now and I can weld it into place. So like I said, I just start by giving it a few tacks in the nice flat areas. And I use the grips to slowly manipulate the panel into shape, followed by hammer and dolly. Again, just keep tacking it as I go along until I'm happy with the final finish. And I start buzzing it up. Now with this, I'm just going to stitch weld it like I would do on the front of a cross member. It is spot welded as well, so I think this is adequate. It's far stronger than a factory job would be. So that's the inner panel, cleaned up, dressed back and primed. Now I'm a lot happy with it. I'm going to make the other side now look like that, but I'm going to do that off camera because I don't want to repeat myself. So this basically needs spot welding to here. But to do that, I need to measure the other side and make sure it's in exactly the same place. So we're going to start by doing that. Now, fortunately for me, a lot of the Nova is symmetrical. So it's just a case of measuring one side and duplicating it on the other side. Now, I'm using a vernier caliper to basically measure and scribe. And as it's already primed, this works really well because it scratches the primer off nicely. And I'm using a steel rule as well as a Stanley blade to mark the metal. Again, this is a really precise way of doing it. It's very fine, and because it's painted, the paint comes off really nicely, and it's a top tip from me. Now, believe it or not, the strut tower doesn't actually have to be in exactly the same place because this doesn't affect the camber like it would do on the front. However, I want it to be in exactly the same place, hence why I'm doing it like this. Once I'm happy with the fitment, I self-taper the centre plug weld hole. I do this just to hold it in place so I know it's exactly the right place, and then I move over to the welder and start plug welding the sides. Talking about plugs, it's now time to shamelessly plug my channel. Now guys, if you enjoy my content, please support the channel by subscribing to it and liking the video. It's completely free to do so. It helps the channel grow, it helps me stay keen and committed to making videos for you guys, because these do take a long time to do. So any support, as you can imagine, would be greatly appreciated. Thank you. So there we go, that is both turrets in. This is obviously just tacked at the minute. I've got the bit of wood in just to wedge it basically to make sure that gap there is exactly the same as that gap. I've also measured to make sure this is exactly the same distance to this, just there, and the angles are all the same. I've done lots and lots of measuring, little bit of tacking, but I think we're bang on now. So now I'm going to start welding it up properly. And then front chassis leg. So I measured everything what it felt like about 20 times, and then I started fitting the front chassis leg. Now this is just 50 by 30mm box section, nothing fancy. It's 3mm thick, so it's very strong and it should last. I cut the rear cross member out of the same material and tacked it into place. Now this is going to support the rear of the subframe. It's also going to tie it all together and make it a lot stronger. Now, bearing in mind, Novas don't have any rear cross members whatsoever, so this is definitely going to be an improvement. Now, I wasn't 100% happy with how level it was, bearing in mind the front cross member which I made is level. So I tied a bit of old tube to it and pulled it down slightly, and that got it absolutely perfect. I'm really happy with the overall outcome, just how I wanted it. Right, now that's tacked in, it's time to box it all in and make it strong. So I put these little corner pieces in and I buzz it all up with a welder, get some nice decent welds on this, and I know it's going to be super strong now. That's not going anywhere, is it? Now time to repeat the process on the other side, and as you can see, I've kept my leverage bar on there because it's absolutely perfectly level at the minute. I don't want it to move, so I've just kept it on until I get it all welded up properly. I do exactly the same thing, triangulate it all and put some nice beefy welds on it. Boom, look at that. Now time to return my attention to the front rear cross member. Now, I fitted this a while ago. I've boxed one side into the sill, but not this side. Now, as you can see, the inner quarter panel is in not very good condition. I will address this when I take the quarter panel off, because I'm going to put a new one on anyway. I'll be able to fix it from the other side. So for now, I'm just going to concentrate on making that inner sill connect to the cross member. So I start by dressing it all back with a linishing pad. I fold a bit of 2mm plate to the right shape. This is an exact copy of the other side. I've kept all the templates. It's nice and simple. I paint the plate up so it's not going to corrode. Then I buzz it to the bottom of the sill and to the back of the cross member. This ties the floor section in nicely, and again, it's going to make it super, super strong. Attack it to the original bit of the floor. However, this isn't really staying because there is going to be a new section fitted here, but I'm just tying the two together for now. With the exception of a bit of dressing back, that is all done. So it's a few days since I did any filming, and today I want to jump straight back on it, and I want to fill this section in here. Now this is the original floor. Obviously this is the cross member I've made and fitted. Now this is probably strong enough as it is, but I want to box it in and make it even stronger and make it look a bit better. So I want to tie the two together and then we know it's absolutely solid. Now before I do that, I just want to plug weld some of these. Now what I did, I painted this before I put this on. This section here does need cutting out, so I'm going to do that at a later date, but for now I'm just going to put a couple of plug welds in here. So a top tip from me, I've used an old drill, I've blunted the end to make it flat, and then you literally just do that, and as you can see, nice and shiny, gets the paint off, perfect. Now you can use a spot weld drill to do that, but I find it kind of cuts the metal, and it's unnecessary. This works really well. It doesn't take any unnecessary metal away, and it's much easier than trying to use a little wire wheel. Top tip from me. So back to the job in hand. Now this is quite a complicated shape because it curves, as you can see. There's a few little recesses. There's the box section to go around, and you put quite a lot of bends in it, tabs, etc. So I think because it's symmetrical, I'm going to make half of it and then fold the template over to make the other half, I think. So we're going to start with some cardboard, just see what we can do. Now, like I said, I want quite a lot of 90-degree tabs off this. So I want to plug weld it to this bit here, and I also want to plug weld the top through it. So it's going to be really strong. I've also ordered a dimple die tool to drill some holes in it and put some dimple dies in. That way, once it's all done, I can spray some wax oil inside just to give it a bit of extra longevity and hopefully make it last. Right, we'll get the cardboard out and see what we can do. I'm not sure if there's a right or a wrong way to do this. I tend to get a bit of cardboard, cut it roughly to shape, and then start drawing on it with Sharpie. Cut bits off as I go along until it fits as well as I can make it. So there we go, that's half done now. These little bits here are reference points for tabs. So what I'm going to do is basically have a little tab here, little tab here, a tab here, tab here, tab there, this tab there, and a little tab here. Then I can plug weld the floor to this. I can plug weld this to this. A few dimple dies, it's going to look awesome, it's going to be as strong as anything. Right, so now I'm going to refine this a little bit more, then transfer it to steel. But first I just need to cut this little tab off here. Now if you got that joke, you probably grew up in the 90s, just like me. So Dr. Pepper, please don't sue me for that. I just couldn't resist. Anyway, back to the job in hand. I'm going to transfer the template to the steel. Now the steel isn't quite long enough, so I do actually have to end out welding a little bit at the end of it, which is what it is. Now I do spend quite a lot of time making sure this panel's as good as I can. So when I do extend it, for example, I use the magnets to make sure it's all nice and square. I weld both sides and then also ground it flat, so it's really strong and you can't tell there's a joint. I finish it off with a hammer and dolly and then continue the template. And once I'm happy, I pull out the 1mm cutting disc on the angle grinder and spend the long, laborious task of cutting it all out. Now this panel actually took me 3 hours to make from start to finish, including a little bit of filming in between. It's quite a long time, a lot longer than it probably shows in this video, especially as it's probably 2 or 3 minutes in the video. But I think it's worth it, and the end result is definitely something I'm proud of. So once it's all cut out, I go over the whole thing with a flat disc, as well as a die grinder, and clean up all the edges, put all the little slots in for the tabs, and just generally tidy it up the best I can to make it look as factory as possible. Once all the dressing's done, it's time to start folding. Now I don't have a fancy folder, all I've got is this little vise, but it does work. So I tend to use a couple of bits of angle iron in the vise. This gives it a nice sharp edge. And I also use a decent hammer. Take my time with it, don't try and do it all at once. And just obviously think about what you're doing as you're going along, because sometimes you can bend something and it means you can't bend something else. But eventually we get there. Now it's probably going to need some fettling, so let's see if it fits. So you can probably see we're a little bit tight here, and the same on this side. But other than that, it doesn't look very far off at all. I'm really happy with this. So yeah, I think this is going to fit really well with a little bit of work. So spend the next half an hour or so just cleaning a few of the edges up to make it fit perfectly. And there we go. That fits fantastic. And there we go. Right. So now I'm happy with the fit. I'm going to start drilling the holes for the dimple dies and the spot welds. So I've been across the panel and centre punched and marked every hole I want, essentially, because I want it to be nice and symmetrical and look really professional. Now it's time to start drilling. So I've got a 25mm drill. It's just a case of going straight through Not like that because I just broke the drill bit. Take two. Now these are genuine Temu hole saws. Now I wouldn't normally recommend Temu, however these hole saws have actually been really good. The drill bits in them are quite brittle and do break quite easily, but these can be replaced quite easily with normal drills. But the actual hole saws are surprisingly good, and I've done lots of holes with these. So yeah, I would recommend them, and they're like £1 each. Can't go wrong. So this is the tool in question. I got a set of 3 from AliExpress for £60, which is a bit of a bargain to be fair, compared to the normal UK prices. It's very good quality. I'm not advertised by AliExpress, by the way. I bought this out of my own money, but I will say it's very good. So if you want one, I'd recommend going over there. Fits together very nicely. So basically what you need to do is drill a 25mm hole, put this through like so, this on the other side. It makes a nice little dimple bit, as you can see. This makes the steel stronger. Obviously it's light because it's got holes in it, and it looks cool. So there's a couple of ways of doing this. Easy way, I guess, is to use a press. I don't have a press, so I'm using a vise. Works the same, but it takes a little bit more effort. You literally put it through like so, put the other side on, stick it in a vise, and squeeze it up like so. Look at that, and then repeat the process a few more times. So now that's done, I'm going to give it a quick coat of X primer followed by some gloss black, because this is the reverse side. It's just going to protect it a little bit. I'm going to fill this with wax oil afterwards, hence the holes, one of the reasons for having them. But, you know, to protect it as much as possible, we'll paint it. So I'll give it a really good key first with some sandpaper. Now this is really important for bare metal, and it's a step a lot of people miss out. And then I follow with a couple of coats of X primer, and I use a heat gun between each coat. And finally, I end with the gloss black. Right, so as you can see, she is now clamped into place. We'll start welding it up. So like anything like this, the key is take your time. So I start in the centre, apply a bit of pressure, and basically slowly plug weld from the inside out. A little bit like you would do a head gasket, I guess, but not quite the same. Now this does take a while, but we want it right, so I've just got to crack on with it. So now the front end's done. I've just knocked this up. So this is literally a bit of 30mm box section, and it's tying the 2 chassis legs together. And it's just going to give it a little bit more strength. It doesn't really need it, but why not? And I'm also going to just stick this bit in here with some 2mm plate as well. Just tie it all in and make it nice and strong. Right, so for now, I'm just going to buzz this up. So while I'm doing this for the next 18 seconds, this is a really good opportunity for you guys to hit the subscribe button. As I said before, this is completely free to do so and really helps the channel grow, and it helps me make great content for you guys. If you appreciate what I do, thank me by hitting the subscribe button and liking the video. And back to the job in hand. That's all dressed back now and primed, and don't that look better? So now the back end is a little bit more done, I want to concentrate on the front end. So as you can see, I've got not 1, but 2 of these transfer boxes. And I want to fit one to that car. Now that is going to be a lot harder than I'll make it sound, because for a start, this is a 2-wheel drive gearbox. So I need to make it a 4-wheel drive gearbox. And secondly, there's quite a lot I need to remove. Plus, it isn't going to physically fit. Plus, I've got to remove the original mounting setup for the back of this and completely get rid of it and cut the rest of it out to make all that fit. So I best start. So the plan to do this in an easy way is I'm going to keep this gearbox in and take the diff out so I can fit the transfer box. Now a 2-wheel drive diff is different to a 4-wheel drive diff. So the outer of the 2-wheel drive diff doesn't do anything, but on a 4-wheel drive one, it drives the transfer box. And then the center is just like a drive shaft, which goes through to the other side. So in theory, if I take the diff out, which is actually quite an easy job to do, take the drive shafts out, I can then take the rear mount off and start mocking up the transfer box. I think that's going to be the easiest way of doing it. Because I could take the gearbox out. It's not really going to do anything for me. It's just going to make it a bit harder because I'm by myself to try and balance it all. So I'm going to start by taking off the homemade strut brace and then whipping the drive shafts out and going from there.
So this is where Novas come into their own. Even with a big engine conversion, it's still easy to work on. So I can get both drive shafts out in like 10 minutes, which you just can't do on a modern car. It's one of the reasons why I love these little beauties. So I pull both shafts, obviously not at the same time. I do make a bit of a fluid leak. Now this is a serious mechanical statement, not a sexual innuendo, so please don't try and sue me. It's now time to remove the quaife diff. Now these are really easy to get out. You remove one 10mm headed bolt, which locks this castle nut, which is basically a tapered adjuster, which basically tightens the diff onto its bearings. That's all it is, really simple. I've got a special tool that removes them. They unscrew counterclockwise, just like a normal thread. There's also a bearing flange on the opposite side to this. It's held on with 5 M8 bolts. Just whip them out to remove the bottom diff pan. Now again, I do make quite a big fluid mess on this. I didn't mean to, but that's life. And then the diff will just pull out the bottom. Oh dear. Just like that.
Oops, didn't mean to do that.
Right, so as you can see, the diff is out. Now, I've made a very crude mount here, just out of some scrap, just to support the back of the gearbox onto these tubes here. Now, I made these a few years ago, just to strengthen the chassis, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's as quick as it is, this car, because it doesn't flex around so much. Everything's reinforced, got solid bushes everywhere, and it just seems to put the power down very well for a 2-litre turbo Nova. So I'm not going to be keeping these, I'm going to make them a lot better. So I've just welded this on here for now, and that is hopefully going to support the back of the gearbox and the rear of the engine, so then I can take the mount off and see what it looks like with the transfer box in place.
And at this point, I probably should have just scrapped the whole project idea and forget it ever happened.
So that's the rear mount off, and as you can see, this is also modified. So 2-litre conversion's been welded on, which is what I normally do. I've also welded this plate on here, this bit here, to reinforce that area, and it's got a solid aluminium rear bush. So yeah, it's not going anywhere. That's as sturdy as anything. Yes, it does make the car vibrate a little bit, but it does work very well. Unfortunately, I will no longer be able to use this, but I'll have to make something a little bit better next time. So that's now ready to try and fit the transfer box. Now it bolts on here. There's a bracket which goes onto the block here, which ties it all together, and then it mounts on the bottom of this. But I've got a very strong feeling this lot here is going to be in the way. So let's have a look. And there we go, that's as close as I can get it, unfortunately. As you can see, it's absolutely nowhere near fitting, which obviously I didn't really expect it to do. So I was hoping I could just cut this bit here, and it's slot between there. But from looking at it, hopefully you can see the width of this. That's not going to happen, which means one thing, and that means I'm going to have to cut right down here, and then make this tunnel much bigger on the inside, which is a bit of a shame, but it is what it is. And I want to be able to take transfer box off without taking the gearbox out, so I don't want to make it really tight, not be able to do that. I fear if I just do a little bit here, I won't be able to get it out, because it's going to have to come way past here to the shaft. One thing I did mention earlier was this. So that essentially, the middle shaft is essentially the drive shaft. As you can see, it comes straight through. That's like a shaft going through a hollow shaft. This outer shaft drives on the outside of the diff. That goes on the inside of the diff. So that comes off the planet gears. This doesn't, so this always turns. And that turns that bit. So because this is a locked transfer box, all the power through here is going to come out the back of here. So in theory, you can run the front drive shafts out of it. It's just going to put all the power to the back wheels, which it doesn't have yet. But we're not going to do that because I don't want to put any more stress on this than I already am doing. So let's get the grinder out.
Right, so what I've done, I've just put a little bit of white paint on this, as you can see, so then I can get a Sharpie and clearly mark where I need to cut. So I'm going to put the transfer box back into place, get a Sharpie out and a ruler, start marking it, and then out comes the grinder. Now this could be interesting because obviously the clutch pedal is quite close to the other side of this. So I may have to move the pedals, who knows, but I need to cut it to fit it. So let's start.
So like all good engineers, I start by trying to take off as little material as possible. And yeah, I quickly realised that is not going to work for this project. So I do mark quite a big area, and then I start cutting it out with a grinder. Now, as always, I use 1mm cutting disc on a 4.5-inch grinder. I find that cuts steel really easily, and it's quite quick and effective. Now, there's multi-layers and multiple skins, etc. We're all interlock here. It's quite a complicated shape for what it is, so I do have to hack at it a bit to get what I need out.
Now, sadly, I've nearly got it to fit, but this, which is the hydraulic fluid feed to the clutch plates, it's fouling the steering rack. Now, I can't really move the steering rack, but because it's a lock transfer box, I don't actually need power steering fluid or hydraulic fluid going to this anymore. So I'll fill it with hydraulic fluid, but I don't actually need to have this bit. So my plan is to cut this off here, and I might weld some kind of bung on it so I can fill it with some power steering fluid. But yeah, I reckon if I cut this across here, it's going to fit. Just like that. So that's the oil feed. We don't need that at the minute, so let's see if it fits.
So I'm no expert on these 90s 4x4 systems, but my understanding is they basically operate from a wet clutch, similar to what you'd have in a motorbike, but instead of being a cable operated system, it's operated by hydraulic fluid, which is driven from your power steering system through an accumulator bulb and into this. Now, if I'm wrong, please correct me. Now, this being a locked system, I don't need to worry about any of that because basically it's locked front to rear.
So that's it. Transfer box is mounted. I've had to absolutely cut loads out of here, loads out of here. So technically I've taken all the strength away from the front. However, my plan is to box all this area in here around the bottom arms because that's a weak spot on Novas. I'm going to make like a lower cross member that goes underneath there. So it's going to be as solid as the rock once it's done. So I had to cut quite a lot out. The steering rack mount, the bottom steering rack mount on this side has had to go. So I need some kind of engineering solution for that, but I'm not overly concerned. The main thing is the tunnel didn't have to be cut in the end. I thought it would do. I'm not exactly sure I'm going to do the exhaust yet, but yeah, I don't need to worry about that just yet. So it's been a couple of weeks since I last did any filming, and I haven't touched the car since then. Been really busy, and I've also had quite a bad case of man flu. But today we're back on the car, and I want to, for the end of this video, get the back of this mounted. The Vauxhall S20 gearboxes, traditionally they had this sump pan on the diff. The four-wheel drive ones have this one, which as you can see is much more robust. It's got a rear mount on it. So this is where the original cav or cleaver mount bolts to. Now, this is what it looks like. That's the original mount. This bolts to the back of the diff pan, and that bolts down on the two studs into the subframe. Now, obviously, I'm not going to be using the subframe, and I don't really want to use this rear mount. It's absolutely massive. I'd like to use the original Nova mount, but I can't really do that because the transfer box is in the way. So I've got a solution. So instead of using this big bulky mount, I want to use this upgraded Nova rear mount. Instead of having it mounted that way, I'm going to have it mounted that way. I'm going to make an adapter that fits on this, bolts that to that. Now this could in theory bolt straight to this. However, because it's only aluminium, it's quite soft, I don't want to risk that. So my plan is to make a little bracket which adapts this with the 3 bolts to this one single bolt. It's going to be nice and strong and tie it all in. But the first thing I need to do is cut this section off here. Now we don't actually need that, it doesn't really do anything. Don't really know why it's there. So I'm going to cut this section off here because that's going to foul the back of the bulkhead. And then I've got something to work with. They do say you shouldn't use a grinder to cut aluminium. However, I've never had a problem with this, but I'm also very cautious just in case. Once it's cut back, I flap biscuit up and make it look nice and factory. I then apply some white paint to the end of the flange, lay over a bit of card, and this transfers the bolt pattern to the cardboard. I cut the card out and this makes a perfect template, which I can then use to transfer to some 5mm steel plate. I'm using really thick heavy plate because I want this to be as strong as possible. There's going to be a lot of torque transferring through this and I don't want it breaking. Once it's cut out and dressed back, I use a centre punch followed by a 3mm drill bit to pilot drill all the holes, and then I follow that with a 10.5mm drill. Now, for once, I managed to do this perfectly the first time. Didn't need any filing and it all fitted really well. So I was pretty pleased with that. I had a clearance issue, so I cut back a bit more of the chassis leg reinforcement panel. Now, don't worry about this. This is all going to be beefed up and it's going to be a lot stronger. I cut off the temporary gearbox mount
fitted the diff pan, and then I tech screwed the Nova mount into roughly where I wanted it. I did this to help me mock it all up and template it. Now, I could have just held it into place, but I found doing it this way is a lot easier. Obviously, the tech screws aren't going to be the final fittings. I will do that properly later on in the video. This basically allows me to make the bracket which connects the gearbox to this mount. I make the bracket in sections, again using the 5mm plate, tack it as I go along. This is just a crude setup for now. It will be dressed back later on. I take it all off, weld it up properly, mark exactly where it's going to bolt up to the Nova mount, and then I tap it. So I use an 8.5mm drill bit. That's the perfect size for tapping a 10mm hole with standard thread pitch. Tap it out, just using a cheap tap and die set, but it does do the job perfectly. Now, I am going to add a nut to this later on, but for now it just bolts it up. Then back to templating, I fill in the other sections. As I said before, I need to beef this up and make it as strong as possible. There's going to be so much power going through this. I don't want it to break. And to be fair, I can assure you it won't. So I've just done an hour or so cleaning some bits up. So this is the mount I've made. I've dressed it back, X-primed it, and I've satin blacked it. Now it looks a lot better. I've welded a nut on the inside, so we've got a good 12-13mm of thread there for the bolt that's going to hold this to the mount. I've also been through my bolts pile and selected 3 suitable bolts, and I've cleaned the diff pan up. So the next job is to bolt this to this, bolt that on there, and then I can start properly modifying the Nova mount to fit this. Right, let's put this on. So I am a bit of a hoarder, unfortunately. It does have its positives though. I did have some nice 10mm bolts in stock, which were perfect for this. They're from an X25 XE engine. I can't exactly remember what they're for, but like I say, they're perfect because they've got a small head bin. The Torx fit in, they fit in the gap really well, and they tighten up lovely. Plus, to give a nice factory Vauxhall look. I then bolt on the mount using a really big, heavy-duty 10mm washer to stop it pulling through. Not that it will do. Now, we'll Loctite this on final assembly, but again, this is just mocking it up at this stage. I then template the bottom of the mount and transfer it to steel. This is going to give me a nice level playing field to bolt the mount to. Right, so I've now made this plate, which is 3mm thick, and I've welded some 10mm bolts through it and ground the heads down a little bit. So this is going to weld to here. It's going to reinforce the area, and it's also going to give me a good mounting point for this. So let's get it on. So I bolt the sump plate back on with the mount fitted and make sure it's in exactly the right place, and then I start welding it all up. I give it a few tacks to start off with, remove the mount again and the sump plate, weld it up a little bit better, and then I bolt it back together. So there we go, that's the transfer box all mounted with a custom rear mount. I'm really pleased with it, it's nice and strong, and it should work really well. Right, so the plan is, obviously I've kind of like tagged it on in place for now. It's got a couple of stitches. I'm going to do a dry build on it, make sure everything works, and I'm going to strip it. I'm probably going to put the car on a rollover jig, spin it over, and then weld all this up nicely because it's a bit hard to do upside down and I want to do a nice job. So I recently did a poll on the community page to see if you guys wanted to watch me make a custom wrist strut brace for this 4x4 Vauxhall Nova. And the answer to that was a yes. So we best crack on. So what we're working with, well, this is basically what we've got so far. So this is all box section. I made all this from scratch. It's going to house a short and clear axle. Now this is all documented in previous videos. If you're interested, have a look. But for today, all we're going to do is basically tie these 2 strut towers in. So we're going to basically put a plate on here, plate on there, tie them together and triangulate it a little bit to make it nice and strong. That's just going to make it a little bit stronger, and it's also going to be a good place to mount the harnesses should I choose to use them. So these are the plates we made up. These are going to be essentially the strut top plates. These are going to be the bottom of the strut top. Now I made these with some 3mm steel. I used the hole saw to cut the middle, and then we cut the outside with a lathe using my dad's lathe. Nice and easy, and I literally just drilled the holes afterwards. Right, so I'm going to bolt these on the strut towers and we'll go from there. So the rear shock absorbers would normally hold these into place, but for now I'm just using M8 bolts because I don't want to damage the shocks welding. So next up we've got this old bit of rusty tube which was actually knocked into ground as a stake, but it will clean up, believe it or not. So I'm going to clean it up first and then we'll start cutting it down. So I've recently discovered some abrasive nylon pads that go on a 4.5-inch grinder, and they're really good at removing rust and paint and stuff like that. Now the beauty of these is they don't damage the metal like a grind disc or flat disc would. So I'd highly recommend these. Once I've gone over the whole thing with the abrasive pad, and then I finish it off with some 320 sandpaper. So there we go, I've just cut it to length and I've got it in the right place and then tacked it. And as you can see, that is level, and so is that. So they're bang on. It all lines up nicely. Learn crossmember by eye. That's the best way to do these things sometimes, bit by eye. Everything lines up. So the next job is to start bracing it all up. As always, I use a bit of scrap cardboard to make a template. Now this shape is actually slightly more complicated than it may look on the camera. Because the strut tower angles aren't horizontal, they do need a bit of a taper. So the easiest way I found to work the angle out was to trim a bit of the cardboard away, see what it fits like, and keep doing so until it fits perfectly. And as both strut towers are symmetrical, I only had to make one template to do both sides. I transferred a template onto some 3mm thick steel. Once cut out and dressed back, I bend them to the right angle. Again, I do this by eye and just use simple tools like a vise and a hammer. And there we go, that's the finished pieces. So I've made these little brackets which are going to tie it all together, make it nice and strong, and look fairly professional, I hope. And fit something along the lines of that. Beautiful. Next job's to tack them into place, and then I can start buzzing them up properly. So those of you that have been following my channel for a while will know I've just hit the big milestone of 3,000 subscribers. So I just wanted to say a massive thank you for that, guys. And it goes without saying, if you want to support the channel, want to help it grow, hit the like button, leave a comment, and obviously subscribe. Back to the welding. Now, I mainly use MIG. I do have a TIG welder, but I'm not very good at it. Now, a few people have asked me what kind of welder do I use. Now, this is a fairly heavy-duty Mac MIG welder, made by SIP. I think it's 180 amp. Comes with a Euro torch, and I think they're about 800 quid or something along the lines of that. But I find it really good for jobs like this. You can use it on thin metal, thick metal. It's very handy. And there we go, that's one side done, and the other. Now to take it off, clean it up, and prime it. So I've just dressed some of the welds back a little bit with a flat disc. I'm now going to use some 320 sandpaper just to dress it down and to prep it basically. Just get rid of some of the rough spots, give it all a good key, and then we can start extra primering it. I just wanted to say this is a short video this week, and it's a short video because it's the festive period. I'm a family man, I've got 2 young children, and yeah, life's busy. These kind of things have to take a step back at this time of the year, unfortunately. However, hopefully in the new year, we'll be doing some more content, which is going to be great. A lot more time on and over. My garden room, which I've been building for the last 6 months in between doing this, is pretty much done. So I'm going to have a lot more time, or some more time, to do this all before Nova. So bear with me, guys. Like I say, Rome wasn't built in a day. It is what it is. Right, back to sanding this. I'll rub it all down with some 320. Once it's all done, I degrease it, etch primer it, and then give it a good couple of coats of satin black paint. So there we go, that is a full video of me making this rear strut brace from scratch. Now, obviously, most people don't have a lathe at home. However, you can buy things like these discs online, pre-cut. You can get really big washers, you get laser cutting services, relatively cheap now. Bits of steel you can pick up cheap. So in my opinion, if anybody's got a cheap welder and a grinder and some basic hand tools, they can tackle something like this themselves. Obviously, this is a custom application for a custom vehicle. There is off-the-shelf items for standard Novas, but there's nothing for this. So if you want to have a go doing something like this, follow my guides, my steps, and you're not going to go too far wrong, providing you take your time and you're patient. So those that have been following the build since day one will know the front of the axle is mounted. I've made some custom mounts, and that's all sorted. However, I did have a problem which I need to rectify. So basically, the axle mounts to this point here. This is a custom crossmember I made. However, it's actually too high, which means that the tunnel's not in the right place for the prop shaft. So the easiest way to sort that is to add something like this. Now, I've had these made. They've just been cut out of some 2mm tube, and they've also been finished on the lathe. So they're essentially going to weld there. I'm just going to space my axle down a little bit. That's 90mm. And that's going to space it down just the right amount to make sure the prop shaft fits down the middle perfectly and the axle's in the right place. So that is a slight cock up on my behalf. However, I feel like once this is done, it's going to fix that issue. So let's convert this tube into an axle mount. I've cut this plate out. It's 3mm thick. And that is going to weld to the end of that. Now I need to make sure this is really square. So I'm going to basically put this on a flat surface, shove this through the centre, tack it for the inside, then I'll weld it properly from the outside. That way I know it's square. So I wanted a flat surface, and luckily I had this bit of 10mm plate laying around. Now it's nice and flat, and it's going to do the job perfectly.
Once it's tacked on the inside, I turn it around and buzz the outside up. Now while I'm doing this, I'd very much appreciate it if you guys could subscribe to the channel. I've got a lot of viewers who regularly watch the channel but haven't subscribed yet. So if you're one of them, please help me out by hitting the subscribe button. And once it's all dressed back, I drill the centre hole to 8.5mm. This is the correct size for a 10mm tap. And then I put a 10mm tap through it. It's a standard 10mm. Put a bolt through that, and then I put a nut on the other side. Now I do this because if I just weld a nut on the other side and don't get the threads aligned, it won't work. Now my idea is I want to make more thread than a standard nut. So I put the nut on so it's just starting to get tight, but not too tight because I don't want to lock threads off. Tack it into place and then take the bolt out. That way, instead of having about 5mm of thread, I've got 8mm. Finally, I finish it off by putting a tap down it one more time to clean it all out. And there we go, that's one completed item. Just put a little bit of X primer on the end. It's now time to weld it into place. I've already marked with Sharpie where it needs to go. So it's just a case of doing that, and away we go. Now to help me out, I put a really long 10mm bolt all the way through the mount and the old mount, just to help centre it. And once I get it tight, I can tap it into the exact right place with a hammer, then I can start welding it on. Now I'm just doing what you'd call a few stitch welds on this. I'm not seaming it all the way around. It's going to be more than strong enough.
So I can't put it off any longer. Let's jack this up and get it bolted up on the front, and I can work out exactly where the back needs to go.
Now I'm trying to put a lot of effort into these videos, so I do use an external microphone. And as you can probably tell, the microphone is not working in these scenes, hence why the audio is a bit off. So I do apologise guys, and I hope it's not too detrimental to the viewing quality. Now back to bolting up the front of the axle. Now I use some old bolts I have laying around. I think these are AWD bolts, the decent quality bolts, and they've got the built-in washer which I really like, so they look nice and OE. And once it's tight, I use the transmission jack to lift the back of the subframe up to try and get everything level. And finally I put the rear diff on. Now I probably should have done this using the transmission stand because it is quite heavy, but I make it work.
Right, so I've got it to where I think it needs to be. Now I've made the top of this level. Now I'm not sure if it needs to be level, but it's not an exact science. Or is it?
So we're getting technical. I'm hoping you can see this, but I've got the laser level out and I've done a centre line straight down the middle of the car. I've done this to make sure the axle is square, which I believe it is because I've already looked, but I want to double check before I make the rear mount. Now, as you can see, the diff is to one side, the transfer box is to the other side. I think that is just the way Cavaliers are. I know this isn't a Cavalier, it's a Nova now, but yeah, I mean the diff definitely at the back is clearly offset, it's not in the centre. So I'm assuming that's to make room for exhaust, stuff like that. Obviously there's universal joints or CV joints in the prop shaft, so it's not really the end of the world. You know, it's designed to have a little bit of movement, so yeah. Right, I'm going to do some measuring and make sure it all looks right, and if it does, we can start making a rear mount.
Now from what I can gather, all the measurements look pretty good, if not spot on. Although, disclaimer, I'm not going to promise this is going to drive straight once I'm done with it. A lot of this is guesswork and a bit of common sense, so fingers crossed it all works. Right, now I'm happy with that. Let's start cutting the rear mount material.
Right, so I've now drilled the holes in the plate, and I've also cut out these little tabs, which are going to fit just like this on the bottom of the bracket. I'm going to weld on. Sleeve for the bush is going to go here at the bottom of that. We're going to have a bush through the middle of that. We're going to have some tabs off this cross member, and that's going to box it all in and make it nice and strong. We're going to have two of them. That's going to stop any kind of like movement. It's got obviously the two at the front. It's going to be really solid. It's going to be semi-solid mounted because it's obviously poly bushes. There's not going to be a lot of flex in it. There might be a little bit of vibration through the body, but we're going to know it's going to handle the power. So let's get these onto here and weld it all up.
So just to clarify for all the haters, the bracket's made out of 5mm thick steel, pretty heavy duty stuff, and it's going to bolt on in the existing rear mount location. So there's 4 M8 bolts directly above the diff where it bolts on. So I used some cheap eBay special welding magnets to weld the brackets on nice and square. I weld the tubes out. Now I bought these off eBay again. They're for a kit car, and bushes were also off eBay. Nice and easy to get and quite cheap. And then I fill in all the little gaps and holes with weld to make it really strong.
And there we go, that's all dressed back now. As you can see, I filled the ends in, welded it all up, painted it black, fitted the bushes, nice and solid, 5mm thick. That's not going anywhere.
Let's put it on. And it slots in just like that, and I have slightly elongated the bolt hole so there's a little bit of adjustment, and I bolt it all down with some decent heavy duty Vauxhall original bolts just to make sure it's nice and strong. And finally I torque it all up with my trusty old DeWalt dagger gun. Don't tell anyone that though. Next job, I need to make some brackets that weld to this and bolt to this. Now I've said this many times before, but you don't need anything fancy to make a template. I've gone in a recycling bin, got a bit of cardboard out, and then cut it, folded it, marked it, cut it, etc, etc, until I'm happy with the shape. Once I'm happy with the shape, I transfer it to some 3mm thick steel. Now I need 4 of these. They all want to be absolutely identical. So I cut them all out roughly first, then I grind them all down so they're exactly the right shape. Now obviously, because I've got curved edges, it's very difficult to cut corners with a grinder, hence why I grind them down to the right shape afterwards. Now it obviously does take time doing this. It'd be a lot easier to get a CNC laser cutter, but obviously I haven't got that and I've only got a little garage. Once they're all cut out, I then start shaping the brackets. Now I need 90-degree bends on these, so I use a hammer and my vise. It works really well. Most people have these items, so most people can do this too. And there we go, one finished bracket minus the centre hole. So you're probably thinking, how are you going to mark it so you can drill it? Well, quite easily. Put a little bit of white paint on the end of the bracket, and then I use the bolt, which has got a tapered end, same size as the bush, slide it through, and as you can see, that's left a perfect little dimple in the end. So now what I need to do is centre punch it and drill it out to 12.5mm. And there we go, that's the first bracket made, and the bolt slides straight through just the way we like it. And there we go, that is 4 mounts made and clamped into place. I'm going to quickly check that it still drops down, make sure I've got plenty of clearance, and I can start welding them into place. But I'm really chuffed with that. I think that looks quite professional and also very strong. Right, so it's the next day. I've checked fitment and subframe. I know it fits okay and I know I can remove it. So it's now time to put these brackets on, weld them onto the cross member. But before I do that, I want to beef them up a little bit more. So I've cut out these little triangle brackets, which are going to weld on something like that. You can see that. That's just going to give it a little bit of extra strength, triangulate it, make it as strong as possible. Right, I'm going to weld these on now, and then I'll transfer them to the vehicle. So there we go, that's one bracket reinforced, welded and dressed back. I've drilled a couple of holes in here because I'm going to spot weld it, or plug weld it, should I say. Believe it or not, I've lost the other bracket. I've only done 2 so far. I've put it down, can't find it anywhere. Had half an hour looking. I'm sure lots of other people do that, but it's very, very, very frustrating. So I think I'm going to tack this on and then resume looking for the bracket because it's got to be somewhere. Right, let's get it on. Is it just me, or is it nearly impossible to weld upside down? I'm sure you can do it, but I struggle so much. So, like I've said lots of times, I'm not going to weld this up properly. I'm just going to give it a couple of stitches. Another reason I hate welding upside down is it does things like this to you. Oh, not only that, the molten metal ran down my chest afterwards, and it's made me look like a roast chicken box. Found it, it rolled under the workbench. Took me over half an hour to find it, but hey ho, that's life. So we'll weld it on now. Continuous seams are just too dangerous right now, so I opt for a good tack. Let it cool down a little bit, another good tack. That way it doesn't ball and go everywhere and burn me. Haters gonna hate. So there we go, guys. That is the axle and subframe completely mounted and as solid as a rock, just the way we want it. Now, one of the things I do want to do, although it's not that important at the minute, but I want to do it, is remove this anti-roll bar. Now, I've got a couple of options. This anti-roll bar is going to foul the floor because of this arced bit here. So I could either put a new anti-roll bar straight through the axle here. There's a nice little gap. I've ordered a B&W mini one to try, see if I can make it fit. Or we can run no anti-roll bar. So a couple of options, but to start off with, I'm just going to remove this because it's in the way.
So these kind of projects cost quite a lot of money, as you can imagine, and the only way I can really afford it is by doing plenty of overtime at work. Now, the negative to that is if I'm doing overtime at work, I can't spend any time in the garage. Not only that, I do have 2 young children, a wife, and family and friends we also like to see regularly. So a way you guys could help me is if you enjoy my content, share it on one of your social media platforms. That's going to help the channel grow and it'll help the channel be more self-sufficient. That means I won't have to do as much overtime because YouTube is going to pay me to do these videos, which you guys enjoy watching.
Right, so I do need to cut these brackets off, but I don't need to do that today. So I think I'm going to do that another day, just in case they do decide to use them for something. I don't think I will, but, you know, they're staying for now anyway. Right, next job, let's put the arms on. But before we can fit these, we need to do something else. Now, if you've been watching for a while, you'll know I'm using Nissan Silvia suspension. Modified Nissan Silvia suspension, but still Silvia suspension. So we're on coilovers at the back, which are going to mount in the existing shock position. Which means these spring platforms are no good, it's extra weight, which I don't need, and they're pretty ugly. So I'm going to cut these off now. Oh, and not only that, the anti-roll bar bracket can definitely go as well, because I did actually modify the anti-roll bar in the past, so that won't even fit anyway. So I'll cut that off, cut them off, and then we can see about fitting it.
I think people take for granted just how long these kind of jobs take. Now, I must have been over an hour just cutting these brackets off and grinding them down. It's ridiculous, but it does make a much better finish. Yeah, I could have left them on, but it just doesn't look right, does it? Let's be honest. So it's worth doing this. I do need to bare metal them anyway because I need to paint them all black again. You may have also noticed I was welding the arms as I was going along. Now the reason I did this was I did leave quite a few grinding marks where I cut the brackets off. I didn't like these, so I just thought I'm going to fill them back in with weld and grind them flat. Once it's all off and clean back, I put the arm back in. It's a little bit awkward to do this by yourself because the hub makes it quite awkward and heavy.
Right, that's a little bit awkward, but as you can see, that is now in. I'll just put a bungee cord on here. Next job is to get the shock absorber. And here's the shock. So it's a max speeding rods, fully adjustable coilover from AliExpress. Now, some people may think these are no good, but if I'm honest, the quality looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with them. They are an up and coming brand, if I'm honest. They do a lot of the decent con rods and stuff like that, which a lot of people rave about. So I thought I'd give them a go. They were 300 quid. I figured worst case, if I'm not happy with them, I could upgrade later down the line. But for this, I can use these to set it up for now. They've also come with solid top mounts, and the front ones are fully adjustable on the top as well. So that's the shock. It's also got a fully adjustable bottom, so you don't have to lower it by just lowering the spring down like you do on a lot of coilovers. You can make this go up and down, which is what I really like. But that does not fit this. So what I need to do, basically, that is the original Cavalier shock. I need to use that insert on this suspension setup. And some people are going to hate me here. My easiest way of doing that is to cut the bottom of the shock off and weld it onto this. Now, I'm going to do a nice job, don't worry. Yeah, we're testing it. If I'm not happy with it, I'll do it again, but I'm sure it's going to be absolutely fine. So do not worry. So I just need to work out the height and go from there.
So first up, I bolt the shock absorber to the custom-made turret I made in the previous video, and I use a couple of MA nuts provided.
So this section here wants to be on at least about 3 inches, looking at the threads in here. Hope you can see them. So we're going to start by doing that. So it's about there. So that takes us to this point, which may look low, but these suspension shocks haven't got as much travel as a standard shock. So that could be deceiving. It's not going to go up that much. So I think I'm going to make it shorter. I can always add a bit, but I've just got a hunch this isn't going to be low enough for what I want. So I'm going to cut the bottom of that shock off. I'm going to cut the bottom of this off. We're going to weld them together and see how it fits.
So I've done stuff like this before, and you'd be pleased to know I've only ever had one fail on breaking half. So, you know, chances are it's going to be fine. 50-50, eh? So once I cut the Cavalier shock, and then cut the brand new one. This is a little bit sacrilege, I know.
So that fits in there, as you can see. And now it's just going to weld on like that. Beautiful.
I used hot glue gun and plenty of bird excrement, and there we have it. Nice and strong, I hope.
And there we go, that is the finished item on. As you can see, it's welded on there nicely. Does need dressing back a little bit, but for now it's going to do the job. I will obviously paint it all. Everything's going to be painted. But yeah, that is the height so far I think the wheel is going to be tucked in quite nicely. The drive shaft, as you can probably see, is going to be nearly level, if not level, when it's sitting on its wheels, which is perfect. So yeah, I'm aware the disc is a little bit rusty, but look at that, nice, loads of arch clearance still. Drive shaft's going to be level. I'm really happy. So now I need to repeat myself on the other side, but I'm going to do that off camera. So if you got this far through the video, you're clearly enjoying it. So if you are, please support the channel by hitting subscribe, and then you won't ever miss another upload. And here she is, sat on her wheels, and don't she look great? Now this is the first time this car's been at the garage on its own wheels for 6 months. It's taken a bit longer than I expected, but I'm really pleased with the progress so far. So I think you'll agree she's sitting really nice, and there's still loads more adjustments. I can make it even lower if I wanted to, but I think that is a good level. Obviously the front needs to come down a little bit to match, but I'm really pleased so far. So as you can see, Cookie's back. He's not been on the channel since the summer, but he's back, and he's going to give me a hand today doing this. Hopefully we might just have some beer, who knows. So what do we want to do? Well, we need to start off by doing a few little jobs. So I've done a bit of triangulation here, which you've probably seen in a previous video. Need to continue it on this side, and then we also need to make all the inner arch bits for that side to match this side, and then we can start finally fitting the Land Rover boot floor. Now these are 3mm thick, 50x30 box section, plenty strong enough and far stronger than the original Nova chassis legs. Beautiful. So once we get the shape roughly right by eye, we'll then move on with the grinder. We each cut out our own piece. Takes a little while and it's a little bit fiddly, but we get there in the end. Then we dress them back and they're ready for welding. I use a couple of magnets and a trusty old hot metal glue gun to join the two bits together. I've just welded this side up, but Cookie doesn't like my welding. He tries to do a better job.
Jesus, man, I can't see shit. Is that even on?
I knew he'd not like my mask. I'm very old school in the sense I
No,
tend
I can't
to blink a
see
lot.
shit.
Have a go.
Huh?
Play with the settings. I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm
No, but
self-taught.
it's not even switched on.
Is it not?
No.
Oh, I've been using it like that for years.
You got it on grind, mate.
We've got it on grind mode, right? Okay, that might help me then.
Maybe. No,
So, yeah.
it's fucking dodgy.
So basically, he wants to set the welder up so it's right for him. I just go in and then feed it back with a grinder. We kind of get good enough results. And that's okay, but yeah. So I thought this would be funny because this is professional and I'm definitely not professional.
You got my ass cracking that here.
No.
Nope.
Yeah, I probably sound a little bit patronising. I'm not. I am curious to see how he makes it work. Is that better?
I think so.
Very good.
Yeah.
It's meant to sound like frying bacon, isn't it?
Yes, that's correct, someone. Young man. No.
That's too high, isn't it? Right, so we've had a bit of a play with the settings and we think it's pretty good now. And I've just had a go, and I must admit, it does seem to weld a bit better. Oh. There you go, that's perfect. Frying bacon. Yeah. Woo. Right, let's do it. Right, so I've actually ended up welding that in because my welding mask, it's broken. Cookie always forgets he shouldn't swear in this. So, so yeah, it's broke. It's probably been broke a long time. It doesn't actually work properly, which is why I get archived quite a lot. So it kind of makes sense. It's good employing professionals occasionally, isn't it?
Definitely.
But yeah, the welder is actually working a lot better in fairness to him. And it's welded quite nice. So I'm going to order a new welding mask and continue this another day without Cookie, I'm afraid. So fast forward a couple of days, my new welding mask has turned up and it's working beautifully. We can carry on with this once again. Now, a few weeks ago, I did fill in this section off camera. I'm not sure if I've mentioned it yet. But basically, I wasn't happy with the original design of that. I wanted it to look more like this side, which I was much happier with. So I basically replicated it onto that side. So, next job. Need to start putting the wheel arch in on this side. This side's ready to go. I just haven't welded it in yet. This side, we've barely started. So let's make a start on this. So as I want this all to be symmetrical, I'm using the same templates from the other side. So start off by setting this straight edge in exactly the same position as the other side, so it's all nice and square.
And I used a template, mirror it over obviously, transfer it to steel and cut it out. And now I've got a nice reference point to weld it in exactly the right place. Once again, I use welding magnets to hold the piece into position and give it a few spot welds before I start seaming it up properly. Now this welding mask is 90-day difference. I cannot believe how bad the old one was in comparison. So I'm getting on much better now. So that's all welded in now and dressed back. Next job, I need to cut this out of steel. Now again, this is a mirror of the other side. However, it is going to slightly differ because the arc shape is slightly different on this side. So I need to add a little bit to this corner here, just so it clears this section here, basically. As you can see, there's a little gap there we want to get rid of, just because that's where the filler net would have been. So yeah, I'm going to make this, but I'm just going to add this corner here, and that should do the job nicely. As always, I use my trusty old combo, which is 2mm steel, 4.5-inch grinder, and a 1mm cutting disc. Right, so that's all cut out now, and I've also put some extra primer on the back. Now, next job I want to do, because I want this to be symmetrical, which could be a problem later down the line because it might not fit properly, but we're going to try, is I want to replicate this wheel arch. So that is the near side wheel arch, which I've cut out, onto this one now. Now these are Transit Mark 7 wheel arches. They're like 50 quid each from Ford, so cheap as chips. Another thing I really like is the swage lines. So for example, if you open the bonnet or the boot, shall I say, at a car show, unless you know what you're looking at, it's kind of going to look factory-ish. If I just make it out of, I don't know, an old oil drum, whatever, it isn't going to. So this is kind of going to look a lot more factory and give it that kind of like original look. So what I want to do, I need to replicate this angle here on this piece here. So I'm going to use the box of my welding mask to make a template, because obviously that needs mirroring onto this. So one thing I do love about building cars is recycling, the amount of things I reuse. For example, this box, perfect template for this job. And if I cut this out, I can then transfer it to the other piece, all being well anyway. So a couple of days later, and we've had a little issue. So I cut this out, and I thought to myself, you know what, I'm going to add 10mm just in case. I'm going to make it 10mm longer. But what I did, I wasn't thinking straight. I actually cut 10mm more off than I needed to. So instead of adding 10mm, I cut 10mm extra off, which is obviously quite a lot when it comes to things like this. So what I've had to do, I've had to weld it back on. This is less than 1mm thick, so quite difficult. So I've mixed it back on, I've cleaned it back up. So there's still a couple of little holes I need to address, but they can be done when I'm actually welding it on, I think. But yeah, that's wasted an hour I didn't really need to do, but never mind. So next job, I need to make a lip that's going to go around here to weld onto the turret tower, so this can plug weld through like I did on the other side. So I've cut this out of 2mm steel, 20mm width, and that's going to go underneath here and plug weld on. So next job I need to do is just mark roughly where this needs to be, so I know exactly where to weld this. So as you can see, I've just clamped it into place to make sure it's in exactly the right position, and I draw around it with a Sharpie, nothing technical here. And then when I go to weld the piece on, I just go in 1.5 millimeters, say. Now, if you was listening, I did say earlier I was going to plug weld this on. I didn't mean that. I meant I was going to plug weld the arch to this piece. This is actually getting properly seam welded to the turret, and it's going to make it nice and strong. So now that bit's on, it's nice and strong, it's time to put the inner arch piece on. This is the bit what connects the original Nova arch to the Transit arch. As you can see, we've clamped it here, clamped it at the bottom. I'm just going to put a few spot welds on it, just hold it in place, and I'll stitch the ends up nicely. Now that's done, I can put the arch on, and I'm really pleased with the fit. So that looks pretty good, I'm pretty happy with that. It's going to need a little bit of fettling, but I think we can start welding that on properly now. So I've pre-drilled small holes in this panel so I can plug weld through. Now, as I said earlier, it's really thin, and if I'm honest, quite difficult to weld. It's nothing like the other stuff I'm using. Yeah, you can see why these panels are cheap. That's all I'm going to say. Anyway, once it's all welded, address it all back, fit the other part, and don't that look good? So as you can see, that is the entire arch setup now done. Now, it does need cleaning back a little bit, it does need titivating, but like I said, I want to make this kind of functional first, just to try it before I then make it look mint. So, next job, we're going to try and fit that Land Rover Discovery boot floor. So as you can imagine, I've never fitted a Land Rover boot floor to Vauxhall Nova using Transit Mark 7 wheel arches. I think it's going to work out okay. So I'm going to be honest, I'm not exactly sure where to start with this.
I have tried fitting the panel just as it is. It definitely don't fit, which is surprising to be fair. So I'm going to use some genuine max peding rods cardboard. Now this is the box that the coilovers came in, and I'm going to template it, I think, because that's all I can think to do. Unfortunately, I don't have a big enough piece of cardboard, so what I'm going to do one side, and hopefully it will mirror over to the other side, and I can make it work from there.
So start by laying a piece of cardboard down, square the chassis legs, and I use a ruler and a Sharpie to start marking out exactly where I need to cut. I start with the turrets because I want to make sure it interlocks around there nicely, and I start moving on to the shape of the arch. Once I'm happy with that, I cut down the template so it's exactly at the halfway point of the chassis legs. That way I can mirror it over and make a nice symmetrical template.
And that just slots together like that, and that is bang on in the centre line, which is just where we want it. So I'm pretty chuffed with that. Now, with a bit of luck, if I've made this symmetrical, which I've tried to, but I probably haven't, I turn that over, it should fit the way around. Shall we go? I will say, if this fits, it's going to be a miracle. Not too far off, a little bit. This arch isn't in quite the same place, but that looks pretty good. So yeah, not too bad. Right, I think what I'll do, I'll transfer this to the steel, and then I can fine tune this side, and hopefully it's all going to work.
So draw around the template, cut it all out, dress it all back, and then it's ready to test fit.
So I've just cut one side out and I've flattened the swage lines out. So not the best job, but I've just flattened them down with a bit of steel, just because obviously I want to weld down, I want it to look kind of factory. So smooth that side out, and I've also kind of incorporated that bit there just to make it look a little bit more factory. However, I've discovered it's not going to physically fit. Well, it will physically fit, but I don't think I'm going to physically be able to get it in. So I'm not really sure I'm going to sort that yet. I might have to cut it down the middle, just because it's going to sit under this panel, and obviously I can't physically slot it in. So yeah, not really exactly sure how to fix that. Could be fun.
In the end, I just decided to cut it down the middle and be done with it. Now, if you've got this far through into the video, you're clearly enjoying it, so please do me a favour by hitting the subscribe button.
And there we go, that is one side done. Really happy with the fit, fits nice. All the way around, obviously this bit's going to be pressed down. I'm going to plug weld it all the way around.
So it took quite a bit of fettling. I used a set square to make sure everything was nice and true, because I wanted it to be as perfect as I can possibly make it. Once I got it fitting, and then repeated the same process I did on the other side, I used some 10mm thick steel and a hammer just to flatten the edges out, the swage lines, trying to make it look as factory as possible. And the little ends here, as you can see, I hammer them down, just make them look like they should end there. Once I'm happy with that, I dress all the corners back with a grinder, ready for its final test fit.
Right, so I'm now really chuffed with this. It's starting to really take shape. Next job, I just need to trim along this edge here. So I need to mark it.
So line the spirit level up exactly where I think it should be, mark the piece, and then cut the floor section. Once I cut it, the centre piece, I flatten down, because there is actually a high spot in the Nova floor there. So I need to essentially stretch the metal, which is exactly what I'm doing here.
Right, that's taken a little bit longer than I wanted it to, but I've cleaned everything back and I've X-primed it. And I've also drilled all the holes in these panels so I can plug weld through it, make it nice and strong. Now, before you all start commenting, you might think I haven't done enough plug welds. I've done plenty. This is all structural. It doesn't even need a floor to operate. This is just to basically fill the hole up.
I use a drill with a blunted end to drill through the spot weld areas into the metal below it to basically scratch the paint off so I can weld straight through. Now, that is a little top tip from me. Works very well, very effective. If you don't, you just get loads of splatter. And I take my time basically plug welding every little hole up. Just take a bit of time, but it's worth it. I manipulate the metal as I go along, push it into place, stretching it, bending it, doing whatever I need to do to make it fit perfectly. Once I get the big section in, and then dress back some of the welds and go into the other section. Repeat the process, use a set square to make sure it's all lined up nicely, get it all tight with the arch, and then start plug welding it exactly the same. In the end, I decided to stitch weld and seam weld the centre section. Thought that way it would be a little bit stronger. This is where I'm joining the two panels together. So I want it to be as strong as possible, really. I plug weld around the rest of the panel and start dressing it back.
That is the boot floor wrapped up and finished, and what we'd call YouTube done. Now, obviously, there's still a little bit more to do. It still needs a bit more dressing back, cleaning up, a bit more paint. But for now, I'm over the moon. I've dressed some of the welds back. I primed it to protect it. Yeah, I'm thrilled. So there we go. That is a Land Rover Discovery Mark 1 boot floor with transit wheel arches in the back of a 4x4 Vauxhall Nova. And if that's not a good enough reason to subscribe, then I don't know what is.
I want to fit one of these along with this cable shifter set. Now, if you don't already know, these are F20 gearboxes out of a Cavalier GSI 4x4. So we do have a transfer box which bolts in here. Gearbox in my Nova is an F20, but it's just a front wheel drive version. The casing is different and there's a few differences. So I need to fit this gearbox to test fit it basically. And the gear shifter setup's out of a much newer Astra J, which is like a 2012 Vauxhall Astra. It's 20 years newer than that gearbox. Believe it or not, the turret and everything what makes this work can fit to an F20 gearbox. So I basically want to retrofit a much newer gear linkage system onto an old style gearbox. But before I do all that, I want to show you a few things. So I've had these machined. These are Vectra 5-stud front hubs, and they've been machined to fit inside Nova wheel bearings. I've got some brand new Febby wheel bearings, good quality OE quality ones. I've also got a new boot gas strut because I think when I did all the welding, I might have damaged my old one because it stopped working. And the ultimate bargain, I've bought a cast T3 Garrett style manifold. Now this is a C20 elect manifold, cast iron, so it won't crack. It's a log type manifold. These were made back in the 90s and they're quite rare now, and I managed to get this off eBay for just 26 quid. So I'm over the moon with this. So you may be thinking, Dan, I thought you was trying to use an Evo 7 turbo. Well, I was. Yeah, I'm going to be completely honest, I was. However, I've had a company approach me, who I'm going to reveal later down the line. They've basically said, look, we've got some decent turbos. Would you like to trial one for your projects? They've offered me a turbo which is suitable for 450 to 500 horsepower on this car. Yeah, and it's got a T3 flange. Hence why I bought this. So I'm going to try that, and hopefully it's all going to fit nicely and clear, but who knows? That's a long way off yet. For now, let's crack on with the gearbox. But before I start on the gearbox, there's one last thing I want to do, and that's to go around some of these seams with some Tiger Seal. Now, obviously, I have painted this. This isn't the final finish. I've just put some primer on for now. However, it's not watertight, and I want it to be much more watertight. Now, I've got a half-used tub of Tiger Seal, which is like a polyurethane adhesive, which will be perfect for the job. And if I don't use it soon, it's going to go off. So I figured I might as well just go around some of these edges, use the last of it up for now. Right, let's do that.
So I'm going for kind of factory look. It doesn't have to be perfect. If you look at most factory cars, the sealant's not great. So as long as it looks better than that, I'm happy. And after a rather sticky 15 minutes, it's all done, and I think it looks pretty good. Most importantly, it's going to keep the water out. Right, so what do we know about fitting these gear cables? Well, I'm going to be honest, I don't know a great deal other than I'm told it all fits. So this is the much newer turret. This is where the cables clip on. As you can see, it goes up and down like so. This is the original one down here, which you probably can't see very well, but it was a rod type setup. So there's a robot bolts on there, and the known for having play in. I did modify it quite a lot, and it was considerably better. However, this is still the best approach. So first thing I'm going to do, just to give us a bit more space, I'm going to remove the coolant header tank, the dizzy, and some hoses, just so we can see what we're doing a little bit more. Now this is a prime example of going backwards to go forward. Now I feel like I constantly keep taking things off this car. It's never going to go back together. However, I need to have confidence in myself because I'm sure it will one day. But yeah, didn't want to do this, but I had to make a bit more space.
Right, this is the offending item I need to remove. Now, what I'm going to do basically, just to make this clear, as this is an F20 gearbox, and so is the other one, to all intents and purposes, they're the same. They are slightly different, but doesn't matter. So I'm going to put the turret on this and make sure the cables fit before I take the gearbox out and then try and work it out, because I think we need to drill a hole in the bulkhead somewhere. So I'm going to unbolt this now, stick this in, and go from there.
So at this point in the video, I was very optimistic this was going to be quite a straightforward job, fitting these gear cables, getting it all working. How wrong was I?
And there we go. As you can see, they are both out, and as you can see, they're quite similar.
Put that there, you kind of see it do the same thing. Bolt up the same, just look entirely different inside. So let's put it in. So what I can gather, that's reverse. You normally tell it's reverse because it's quite clunky, like that. So reverse, first, second somewhere, second, fourth, third, fifth. Something along the lines of that. Now, if you're really lucky, your F20 or F16 or F18 gearbox will have a mounting lugs for this. This holds the cable. I'm not lucky. I've got 3 F20 gearboxes and none of them have them. Such is life. So we're going to have to make something which adapts this to the gearbox. Now, you can just make a bracket with bolts on to one of the bell housing bolts. I think I'll do that, but I think I'm going to try and give it some more support somewhere else. Not exactly sure I'm going to do that yet, but we'll get to that. First off, I need to just try and make sure the cables kind of fit in the right place. And this is where I underestimated just how hard this was going to be. Getting a drill in here to drill some holes, although it doesn't look too bad on camera, it was really hard. Couldn't do it dash side because I didn't want to take the dash out, and engine bay was stupidly tight. I had to take the start motor out, and yeah, just struggle. Wasn't great. Right, let's try and get these cables through the hole and see what it looks like. So there we go, that physically fits, and as you can hear, it's working, although the bracket is moving a little bit, so it's not going to work properly. So next problem, as you can see, the cable's too long. This needs to be here basically. So yeah, I need to shorten them a little bit, but that's not such a concern. Also, I think they're mounted slightly too high under there. You can't see, but the holes are drilled slightly too high. However, I couldn't really get in very well. So once I strip it to rebuild the car, shall we say, we'll then make the holes a little bit bigger so we can move the cables down a little bit. As you can see there, that is all working properly. This bracket's just floating around. It won't be forever. And the cables have gone through there nicely. But like I say, they're a little bit high there. It's just putting a bit of a curve on the cable. So a couple of days later, I've dragged the gearbox out that I want to use. And now I need to essentially make this fit this. Now, as you can see, there's 0 bolt holes. Nothing for me to go off. But I've been looking at lots of pictures. And I think my plan is I'm going to make a bracket. From what I can gather from looking at pictures, it needs to sit level with this. It's about this kind of high. Roughly about there. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to make a little bracket with bolts to this. Goes across here, which I can bolt this to. And I think I'm just going to make it look as good as I can from the pictures that I've got. Make sure it all works off the car. And then we'll take a risk. Obviously, it is adjustable a little bit, the gear linkage setup. So I'm not too worried, but yeah. Need to do something like that. So let's make a start. As always, I use a bit of old recycled cardboard to make a template. I roughly cut it out, draw it up, make it look something like, and then transfer it to steel. Now, if I'm honest, this was actually quite difficult. There was quite a lot of weird angles and shapes I had to compete with, and I was only looking at pictures. I had no other reference, so it was a little bit difficult to work out exactly where it needed to be. But with a little bit of time and patience, we did get there. Now, this bracket, I'm going to be honest with you guys, took me about 3 hours to make. That's 3 hours, and this is a, 15-20 minute video. And this is just a small bit of the video, but it's a central bit. So this just goes to show how long I spend doing these videos. Now, the channel's grown significantly recently. I'm really happy with the progress. But for me to put even more time into these videos to make them even longer and even better for you guys, I need more subscribers. So if you can help me by hitting the subscribe button, sharing the videos, sharing the channel, doing anything like that. If you enjoy these videos, just support the channel. All you have to do is hit subscribe, like the video, share it with your friends, and that's going to help me spend more time in the garage and do more stuff like this. I really enjoy doing it. I'm loving how it's all growing, but I do need a bit of help from you guys because it's very, very labor intensive. And just remember, it's completely free to subscribe, to comment on the channel, to do anything like that. And it's going to make sure you don't miss out on any future content or any future projects. So I've made this little beauty. Now, I'm going to be honest, the first fit didn't fit. So I've had to redesign it slightly, but we've got there. It fits quite nicely now. So basically I had to follow the shape of the diff essentially, because that's like a curved radius there. I've welded some little nuts on the back, and that just simply bolts through like so. So, as you can see, that bolts to that. Next job, I need to get the bracket to work. So I'm hoping I can clamp that somewhere along them lines and get it to work fine and dandy. Right, let's have a go. So doing this was a little bit of trial and error. I did have some pictures of reference points, but I didn't know exactly where it needed to be. So I used some welding clamps just to kind of hold it in place, keep trying it until I was happy. Right, so after quite a lot of playing, I think we've got it in about the right place for it to work. So I'm going to loosely drill holes. Well, I say loosely, I'm just going to drill holes. Then nut and bolt it and just see if it feels okay, but I think it's going to work. So I will use captain nuts at the end, but for now I'm just going to bolt it just to make sure it works. I don't want to make it too permanent because it may not. First, second, third, fourth, fifth. Beautiful. So I wasn't 100% happy how solid this was, so I wanted to secure it on this side. So I've used this. This is an XC or a C20 inlet manifold bracket. This kind of holds the bottom of the inlet manifold, stops it breaking essentially. It's an old one, I didn't need it. So I've basically bent it like so. It should be fairly straight. Ground it about a little bit, and that is going to bolt on there like so. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to weld this to this, dress it all back, make it look factory. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with that, and it's going to make it a lot more solid. Right, let's weld it on. So what I do, I tack it up first, then I take it off, weld it up properly. Now I want this to be really strong, I want it to support it, and I want it to look as factory as possible. So as an example, where I folded the metal, I slotted it, I build this back up with weld afterwards, and I grind it all down so it kind of matches and looks, oh wait, it doesn't look like I've messed with it. Once it's all welded up and I'm happy with it, I then move on to add in some dimple die holes. Now, I didn't really need to do this, but again, makes it a little bit lighter, gives it a little bit more strength, and it looks kind of cool. And again, makes it look a little bit more factory, I guess. Now, people have asked me before where I got my dimple die tool from. Now, this was from AliExpress. I think it's a set of 3 for about 60 quid, which may sound expensive, but they're really well made and really decently engineered. So yeah, they're substantial, they're not crap, and they should last a lifetime. Anyway, that's the finished bracket. As you can see, I've ground it all flush, dressed it all back, and now I'm sanding it ready for some paint. A couple of coats of primer and some satin black later, and don't that look great? It's really sturdy now, and it's going to work perfectly. Please forgive the audio, my mic wasn't switched on. Put the bracket back on, put the gear cables on. I've just tweaked it a little bit because the cables weren't quite right. But look at this, I'm really chuffed with this. So, reverse, you can hear that clunk. That's reverse, you have to lift the gate up to get up. And we've got first, second, third, fourth, and fifth. Beautiful, and it feels really nice. So although this feels really good, there's still room for improvement, such as this here. Now, can you see the play in that? That's loads and loads of play. Now, remember the cables are actually too long for the Nova. So I am going to shorten them, and I am going to do away with these because they look terrible. It's a really bad design. I'm going to put a more solid, substantial bit of kit on. So that's going to hopefully resolve that and make it even tighter. There's a little bit of play in this bush here. Well, there was a little bit of play. But what I've done is I've literally turned it round. So I've spun it around 180 degrees. Because as you can see, it's not quite in the centre. It's worn to one side. So that's taken quite a lot to play out. So I'm really happy with that. So yeah, get rid of play out of them 2 ball joints, and I think it's going to feel as solid as a rock. Right, next job, we've got to physically remove the old gearbox. Now, as I said at the start of the video, I do have a 5-stud front hub setup to put on this. So I am taking the hub off. I don't really need to do that, but I'm doing it just because I need to do it later down the line anyway. It gives me a bit more room. Now, I made this lower kind of cross-member bracey thing a few years ago, and it just stiffens the front end up. Again, that's in the way, has to come off. Normal Nova wouldn't have this. Obviously, a normal Nova wouldn't have a full before transfer box either, so let's not compare. So once I get suspension and that out the way, I unbolt transfer box brackets so I can pull the transfer box out the gearbox. Now remember, it's the wrong gearbox fitted, so it's not actually properly fitted, so it doesn't take too long.
Then remove the homemade mount off the back of the sump, the front mount, take out the bell housing bolts, obviously the clutch cable, and that is pretty much it. They're fairly simple on these old girls, a little bit tighter because obviously we've got a big 2-litre engine, but that's it. So the bolts should all be out now, so the gearbox should just slide out, and as per normal it doesn't because I left one bell housing bolt in. Once I identified that, it just slides out.
Right, we're a bit tight for space, but the next job is this area here. Now, I cut a lot of this out in the previous video to fit the transfer box. Obviously, the steering rack's not supported here. I've had to cut this right back, and all these bottom arms, etc., aren't very well supported, so we need to do something about that. So what I've done, I've cleaned everything back, and I've made these plates. So there's a plate there that's going to weld here and plug weld through. That's going to box this section in here and make it a lot stronger. I've also done a nice little dimple die there, just make it a little bit lighter and make it look a little bit more factory. And I've also made this here, which has got a nice little curve put in here, which is going to go something like that. It's going to weld all the way around. A couple of plug welds, and it's going to be nice and strong. Just box it all in and give it a bit more strength. Then once all that's welded in, I'll address this section here and this section here.
So these are made out of 2mm thick steel sheet. I made everything by hand using just basic tools such as angle grinder, hammers, some big 10mm thick steel sheets just to kind of clamp the metal to and help bend it, and some chisels and just stuff like that. I do plan on making a lower cross member for this area once it's all done, but for now this is going to give it the strength and allow me to fit the gearbox properly.
So this bit's all done now. He's dressing back a little bit more, but like I've said a million times, this isn't the final finish. This is just so I can test it all, and then I'm going to bare shell the car and finish all these little jobs off. Right, next job is the bottom of this steering rack here. Now it's a little bit loose because I've cut some of the bracket off. It should be like that. So I've just made this little bit of steel. Just going to weld there like so and spot weld to the bulkhead. That's going to make it a bit stronger. And I just need to cut the bottom of this off because that's just going to foul. And that should work beautifully.
So the plan for now is to repair all these little bits on the car to make it usable on the track. And then I want to make sure she drives properly. So just build it up with basic bits. I'm not going to go to town on it. I'm not going to sort all the bodywork 100%. Just make it okay so I can drive it, make sure she drives well. And then I'm going to bare shell the car and rebuild it properly in the future.
And finally, the last piece, I've just cut it out, put a dimple die, drilled some holes for some plug welds, and that's going to fit something along the lines of that. So the first thing we need to do to fit this is to take this transfer box off and make it look like that one. Now, I could just fit that to that. However, this one here is locked and that one isn't. So that one's still got the original clutch in, this one hasn't. So we're going to take the transfer box off, we're going to cut some brackets off it, some lugs and a few bits like that. We're also going to inspect inside the transfer box. We're going to take it apart and have a look inside, see exactly how it works. So first things first, we've got to unbolt it. Now it's held on with a number of M8 bolts with 13mm heads. Some of them are a little bit awkward to get to, even with the gearbox off the car like this. So I use a combination of spanners, ratchet spanners and sockets. Once they're all out, it just simply slides off. Straight away, there's a few alarm bells because I've noticed there's no O-ring between the two. It's just got gasket glue. So now the box is off, I turn it on its end and unbolt the M8 bolts. These have got 6mm Allen heads holding the end of the viscous coupling on essentially. This splits the box in two. So the viscous coupling and the clutch slave just pull straight off from this. And when I say clutch slave, I mean the clutch which engages the four-wheel drive system. So the biggest problem with these transfer boxes is the clutches wear, and then the slave cylinder pops its seal, pushing hydraulic fluid into the transfer box. Basically, it pours pressurized hydraulic fluid out the breather of the transfer box and mixes it in with the gear oil. So the clutch plates are similar to motorcycle clutch plates, the wet clutch plates. These have been removed on this and it's had locking plates fitted, which makes it essentially a direct drive. So there we go, we've got it all apart. The seller of this did promise me that it had locking plates, which it does. So that locks the inner to the outer. That replaces the clutch pack. So yeah, it was bang on what you're saying. So it's a little bit dirty inside, but it all looks in good condition. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to give it a good clean out, and then we'll take it from there. So when I say a direct drive, I do not mean this is a permanent four-wheel drive system, because it's not. It still has a viscous coupling, which will still limit the power to the back wheels. Also means it won't fully engage all the time. It will slip a little bit if it needs to. So yeah, it's kind of best of both worlds being locked. They're meant to drive a lot better like it. Anyway, back to what I'm doing. So I use petrol as a degreaser.
and it works really well at getting rid of tough, grimy oil stains. So it's top tip from me, and it's one of the best degreasers you can use, readily available, and it's far cheaper than a lot of the stuff off the shelf. So I stripped it all down. As you can see, I've made a bit of a mess, but trust me, I know where it all goes. And the original transfer box, well, a bit dirty inside, but it wasn't in the best condition. Some of the bearings I wasn't happy with, a little bit noisy, for example. Now, yes, I'm sure I could knock that bearing out. It won't be too much of a problem. But as I have another one, like this one here, which I've already stripped, as you can see, which is in much better condition, I decided to go with this. So I've stripped it, given it a quick clean. This is the one what I actually used for mocking up in the first place. So this is the one that's already been modified. And a stroke of good luck, actually got locking plates in as well. So we're going to carry on cleaning it all and then rebuild this one onto that gearbox. So this is the section where the hydraulic oil would enter. So normally I have a fitting on here and thread. Now I've cut this off on a previous video. I'm going to tidy this up today, and I'm also going to cap the hole. So we're going to grind this down. I'm going to tap this hole here. I'm going to put a stainless steel bolt in it. I'm going to grind it all flush, and I'm also going to use a bit of Loctite, and that's going to seal it up beautifully. Now I'd like to think all the best engine tuners have got a workbench a bit like this. Right, so what do? We grind it flat, we tap it with an M8 tap, a little bit awkward because it's at an angle, and then I put my bolt in with plenty of Loctite. Once it's tight, I then lop it off. I start with a hacksaw and then finish with a grinder because it's a bit hard to cut. And then I finish it up with a file. Once that's done, I use a centre punch, just put a couple of knocks in around the edge. This is going to stop it coming loose because it's going to basically peen it over. And then I dress it back one last time with a file. Right, so that's all done now, cleaned up, and it's looking a lot better. Really happy with that. So next job is to start cleaning everything else a bit more, and then it can go back together. And as always, I take particular care making sure the environment I work in is absolutely spotless before I do a job like this. One little bit of dirt or grit could absolutely ruin this, so I make sure everything's spotless first. I sweep the floor, clean all the rubbish away, as you can see. So what I've noticed is this has clearly been a part. Now, obviously we know it's been a part because it's got locking plates, but also there's quite a lot of engineer markings inside. For example, there's a number there, V38755. I have no idea what it means, but someone's clearly etched that in, and it also says P3110. So if anybody knows what that means, just let me know in the comments because I'm really interested. But I'm assuming it means it's been tested and calibrated, and it's all good, hopefully. So I use a bit of 320 grit sandpaper just to clean all the gasket faces. There isn't actually gaskets on this, it's just sealant. When I clean it all back again with petrol. Tip all the rubbish out and use a bit of brake cleaner just to get the last few bits off. And it's looking a lot better now. I'm really happy with it. Right, so it's all clean now. Let's start rebuilding. So what goes where? That definitely goes in there. And that goes in there. Now I am going to put a bit of oil in because I don't like to assemble stuff dry. This is just gear oil. So to all intents and purposes, this is kind of like a backwards diff. So what I've just put in is the crown wheel. Shaft that goes out your gearbox is a little bit like your pinion. So this is where the clutch plates would have gone originally. I've got locking plates which basically lock this to the casing, allowing the drive to go straight through this into the viscous coupler. So these locking plates have all got to go in the same way. Now it's not as complicated as it sounds. They won't physically fit if you don't line them up properly, but it is a little bit frustrating turning them until you get it right. So once they're all in and seated properly, I drizzle a bit more oil in. I clean it with gasket face one last time and apply a bit of gasket sealant. Now this is the Victor Iron stuff. I've complimented this in the past. It's really good stuff. I'd highly recommend it. It's not that expensive. I then put on the modified slave section. Now, I'm not really sure if this is what you call a slave cylinder, but that's what it does to me. That's what I'm going to call it. Apply a little bit more gasket sealant onto the other side. Then it's ready for the viscous coupler to be knocked onto that. Now, I have to use a copper hammer to do this because it is a little bit tight, but it does go on. And finally, I put the bolts in and torque them up to manufacturer's spec. Now it's all assembled, I then fill it up with gear oil. Now I found the easiest way to do this was to make a little adapter hose what goes on the breather. So I take the fill plug out the side, fill it up until oil comes out. Once it comes out, you know it's bang on. So that's the transfer box all rebuilt and ready to be fitted.
Right, now the transfer box is out of the way. Next job is to get the gearbox fit to this. Then I'm going to bolt the transfer box on. Now I could put the transfer box on now and then bolt it up, but I'm by myself and it's quite a heavy item, so I think it's just going to be a little bit easier to do it without.
Hindsight's a wonderful thing. I'm not sure if it was easy doing it this way, but this is the way I did it. So putting the gearbox in like it would be a front wheel drive gearbox, that was pretty straightforward, especially with a 2-post lift and a transmission stand. Went straight in, I bolted all the bell housing bolts up as you should, and that is the easy bit out of the way. Now this was 7 o'clock Sunday morning when I was doing this, and it kind of gave me a bit of false hope, because from this moment onwards the job was a bit of a nightmare. So I had to mount the gearbox on its mount so I could take the transmission stand away, and that's where my first problem became quite evident. Now this heavy duty little bracket which I made, which links the rear mount to the gearbox, basically I couldn't get anything on to tighten it up when the gearbox was in situ. So what I had to do, I had to drill a hole in the back so I could get a socket and an extension through. Not the end of the world, but it set me back a little bit. Then it was a case of putting the front mount on and sitting it on my tall axle stand so I could use a transmission stand to put the transfer box in. This was a little bit of faffing about off camera because I did try and use both at the same time, but they kept catching each other. Hence why I had to do it this way. I could have just lifted the transfer box in, but it is quite heavy and I didn't want to drop it on my toes. Now you've got to remember this transfer box is a little bit of an afterthought. The gearbox was invented way before the 4-wheel drive system, so it kind of bolts in where the original bearing would be for the diff. And because of that, it's really difficult to get to the bolts, especially on the car. And this took me absolutely bloody ages. A lot of the bolts you could only really get to with a spanner at best. You couldn't even get a ratchet spanner in. It was just really awkward. I couldn't see them from the top, couldn't see them from the bottom. It was just complete guesswork and doing it by feel. Once it's all tight though, I then put the rear mount on. Again, it took a little bit of wiggling because all the mounts are solid, but we got there. And then it was just a case of nipping it all up, and that is the gearbox fully mounted and safe. So I'm really pleased now. First off, I want to fit these 5-stud conversion hubs alongside these Cavalier turbo brakes, and to fit these Vectra Super Touring 16-inch alloys on the front. So the second thing I want to do is to fit these gear cables and the selector. This is out of an Aston J. They're too long and they're not going to fit the Nova, so I'm going to show you exactly how to modify them and make them work and shift perfectly. Right, let's start by fitting this front hub. So what we've got here, we've got some Vectra 5-stud front hubs which have been machined to fit inside Nova wheel bearings. I managed to get a spare set of standard Nova knuckles. I pressed the old bearings out, put some new Lucas bearings in, and then pressed them all together. Give it a lick of paint and they look loads better. So as it was already converted to big block previously, the shafts fit straight in. Standard Nova shafts would not fit these hubs though, just to pre-warn you in case you think you can do it. So reassemble all the suspension in reverse order and torque everything up to manufacturer's spec using my windy gun. I did make a slight cock up though because I forgot to put the spacer between the drive shaft and the CV joint. Now a standard Nova wouldn't have these, but because it's got big block CV joints, you need to fit a spacer. Once that was rectified, it was time to put the brand new Cavalier Turbo front brake discs on. Now I've already got Cavalier Turbo brake calipers and pads, but I was running 4-stud discs. So this just kind of completes the setup. And then finally I can fit the 16-inch Super Touring alloy. So now the near side's done, we're going to move on to the offside. Now this side is slightly different because the drive shaft's slightly different. So I'm going to explain the difference and show you now. So the difference, so this is a modified equal length drive shaft setup from a Cavalier. So this has been shortened to fit a Nova, and that is the centre bearing. So this bolts to the block, comes out the gearbox, and that goes there, and that pulls down. And the idea is this and the other side shaft is about the same, so the angle's about the same, which reduces torque steer. So what's different about the 4-wheel drive system? Well, it still has this kind of drive shaft setup, but it doesn't use this. This is essentially the transfer box. The transfer box is this bit here, and that goes into the end of the transfer box. That's the only difference. So if you're going to make a 4-wheel drive Nova, which I wouldn't recommend, if you are going to do it, you need an equal length drive shaft setup, although that is least of your worries. So I've got a quick question. I've invested in a better quality microphone recently because I were getting some negative feedback, which I took on board. Audio was a little bit up and down. Let me know in the comments if you think it's good enough. I'll stick with it. If you don't, I'll invest in a really, really good one. but they are a lot of pennies. And obviously, if you know anybody who wants to sponsor my channel by supplying one or even giving me a small donation towards one, then obviously I'm very welcome to any donations. Alternatively, just subscribe. That does the same thing eventually.
Right, so now she's back on her wheels and sitting pretty, it's time to move on to the gear cables. Now, I've not seen anybody shorten these online. Any car. I've looked all over YouTube, looked all over the internet. I can't find any videos of anybody shorting any. There probably is some, but I can't see them. So I've had to work out exactly how to do that. So I've had to work out how they're assembled in the factory and how I can disassemble them and build them back up. Because obviously these are going to be rigid cables. If they're not, it's not going to work because they're a push-pull cable. So first off, let's get it in the car, let's get it mocked up and see how much we need to shorten it by.
Right, so there we go, that end is on as it should be. So I said I reckon it needs shortening by 6 inches, actually needs shortening by 6.5 inches. So that's 17 centimetres. So I'm going to take all this out now, and hopefully once we're done, this is going to fit in the standard position. So if you look here, you can see exactly where it's been crimped. Now, this is a flexible cable running through the inner, but each end you've got a solid 6mm bar coming out with a hole in the middle where it crimps onto the cable. Now, this has to be solid, so it's crimped further down. You can't crimp it this end because you can't physically get to it. If this was the very end of the steel, then it would fold over instead of going in. As you can see, that's solid. So I'd imagine this probably ends down here somewhere. It gives it a bit of rigidity. So I hope that makes sense. Hence why they've crimped it here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grind this off carefully, and then we can start pulling it apart.
So this is one of them jobs where you have to be super, super careful. So I grind a little bit off and I keep twisting it slightly till it eventually cracks, and then I just pull the end out. So what do we know? Well, that needs to be 57mm. So inner 57mm to the end. So this is the inner. That's 57mm. Inner BJ, and that's 18. Right, so what does all this mean then? So this here, once it's complete, slides on this 57mm, and this should be a total length of 183mm. So that's going to go on like that. So whatever I shorten this cable by, which is going to be 6.5 inches, this needs to go on the same amount for the inner cable to be the same length, if that makes sense. So we want to take 6.5 inches off this, 17 centimetres. So next up, we need to shorten the outer cable the same length. So I'm going to use this as a guide. So I think I'm going to cut it here to start off with. Then I need to cut the same amount off this. Then I need to cut the same amount off this. I'm going to use a little bit of tape as a reference. And there we go. That's that. So now we need to join them two back together.
So if you've been watching my videos for a while, you'll know I'm a bit of a hoarder, and there's a good reason for that. Now, I wanted a bit of steel tube that went over the outside of this cable. I've looked in my steel bin, found this bit of old scrap pipe. I don't know what it was off, I can't remember. But it just happens to be exactly the right bore. So I'm going to cut a couple of lengths of this, which is going to sleeve over the top of this. I can then bond this to this, and that is going to act as a perfect joiner for my cable and make it nice and strong. And there we go, as if by magic, that slots onto there, and that slots onto there. Beautiful. So the next thing I want to do is get rid of this end ball joint. Now, as you can probably see there's a lot of play in it. It's quite worn, it's kind of like rubber mounted. I've bought these, which are actually bonnet strut ball joints. So the plan is I'm going to lock that off. I'm going to put a die down the end, standard M6 thread, which is what that is. And then I can then screw that on and set the position perfect. That's the plan anyway. So I start by cutting the end off and cleaning the end up. Then transfer it to the vise and use an M6 die to put a thread down the end of this rod. Now it's stainless steel, it is quite hard. So I take my time
and just work it backwards and forwards, and eventually we get there. And it's a case of screwing a new ball joint on and locking it off the spanner. And don't that look great? Another little development, instead of bonding this tube on, I've discovered I can actually crimp it. So this is a crimper for electrical cables. So this is for like your big battery cable, etc. Hydraulic crimper. I've discovered if I use a 50mm crimper, it works perfectly. So I'm going to show you. So there we go. That is now crimped on there beautifully. And the cable still slides through perfectly. I am very happy with that. So I slide the other-ended out cable on and then crimp it up a couple of times. Now I'm using a 50mm squared crimper for this. That'll do a normal 50mm square crimp in case you want to do it. Probably unlikely you'll copy me exactly, but there you go, that's what I'm using. Look at that, factory. You'd never know, would you? And the cable pushes and pulls through beautifully. So we're a couple of days later and I've been thinking about how I'm going to do this. So this is the inner part of the cable. Now I ground it off and the plan was to weld it back up and then weld it onto the flexible part of the cable essentially. But then I thought, what about, instead of doing that, buying some more rod? So what I've done, I've bought some 6mm stainless steel rod with a 4mm hole in the middle, which is exactly the same spec as the original piece. What I'm going to do, I'm going to cut this off here. I'm going to thread the end to M6. I bought these nice long M6mm nuts. These are stainless steel, which is going to slot onto there. I can then thread the end of that, slot that onto that, cut this at the same length as standard, and then the creme de la creme, I've made a jaw for my crimper, which has got a 5.5mm hole in it, which allows me to crimp it. So this is the scrap bit of cable, and I've managed to crimp the flexible bit to the solid 6mm bit. That's the crimp there. It's not quite as neat, but it does work, and it's absolutely solid. So I'm really happy with that because it's basically a factory finish. That's how it should be. So yeah, once these are shortened, I don't think you're going to really know, and they're going to be just as reliable, just as strong, and very factory looking. So I am really pleased with that. Right, let's put the theory into practice and make it all work. Right, so I start by dismantling the ball joint. Now this is the adjustable end, so they generally have like a sprung-loaded lock, which you slide back, which allows you to pull it apart. Now I do try and put a thread on the end of this, but what I'm finding is the steel rod is moving inside the plastic end. Now I did try getting the steel bit out plastic, you wouldn't have any of it. So in the end, what I did do was I drilled the end of the nut out to 6mm so it could be pressed on. Then I drilled a couple of 2mm pinholes straight through the locking nut and the rod inside it. Then I put a 2mm locking pin straight through the centre of that, ground it off, and then I used my crimper to crimp it into place. So this is kind of like a mechanical lock. It's not going anywhere, and it's pressed as well. Finally, I finish it off in a drill with a bit of emery cloth, acting like a lathe, and it looks absolutely great. I'm super stoked with it. Right, if I go back to my original diagram, this flexible cable went inside this solid piece at 57mm. Now, I've just used my vernier caliper, just this here, to measure 57mm on there, as you can see. So this cable's all the way out. So if I put that there, which lines up with that masking tape there, that cable's all the way out, and then mark where this needs to be, in reference to the end of this cable, that is exactly where the cable needs to be. So if I use these modified crimpers now, crimp that into place, that should be one cable done. So I crimped it with the 5.5mm crimper, however, wasn't quite happy with how tight it was, so I've changed it for a 5mm. So basically I've just drilled another 5mm hole through the end, done it with that, and it's absolutely as solid as a rock. I dress it back a little bit with a little bit of emery cloth afterwards, and put the ball joint back on, and it's perfect. So there we go, that's one completed cable. Now, it feels nice and smooth, it works really well. Nice and strong. Yes, the factory crimp does look a little bit nicer than that. However, let's be honest, it doesn't really matter too much. You're not going to see this. I have just dressed it back a little bit with a flat disc. But yeah. Right, let's do the other cable. I'm going to do that off camera because I don't need to repeat myself and see what she fits like.
So both cables are now done, they're super smooth, I've oiled them and they feel really good. So next job is to fit them on the car. Now one thing I do need to do when I restore the car is to tidy up the hole in the bulkhead. It's a little bit hacked, I'm not that happy with it, and I want to make it so a proper grommet can either bolt on or slot through. So that's a job for a later date, but for now, feed the cables through and I put the ball joints on the other end, which again is a little bit fiddly. Now the cables are in exactly the right place, so my measurements worked. So I'll hook it up to the gear shifter and then start working out how I'm going to bolt it down. So top tip from me is, because it's got captive bolts going through the middle, put a little bit of white paint on the bottom of them, line it up on the floor where it wants to be, and then you've got 4 white dots with exactly where you need to drill. So I drill the holes to 6.5mm, then I use some penny washers and some nylon nuts to hold it on. And as I said earlier, I will weld the floor up before I use it on the road. This is just to test it out. So there we go, we've got it bolted in. What I've done, I've just drilled some temporary holes in the floor for now to bolt this through. When I restore the car properly, I'm going to weld a plate in this, fill all the holes up, and then I'll bolt it in better. Plus, when I get the seating, I can work out exactly how high I want it. But I think at the minute, I'm pretty happy with that. So I just want to show you just how good this feels. Now remember, what I've done, this mod applies to a lot of vehicles. Anything with an engine conversion with gear cables, and needs shortening, you could apply this logic to them gear cables and make it work. But just look how good this is. Whew. That is absolutely beautiful. Reverse. First, second, third, fourth, and fifth. Proper direct, solid. Loads better than even the standard gear cables, because I've removed them rubber bushes at the end. Loads more direct. Really nice. Woo! That feels good. A Nova gear linkage should not feel that good. They are normally very sloppy. This is completely opposite. Very direct, very sharp. Stunning. Really happy. I want to completely overhaul the rear brake system on this 4-wheel drive Vauxhall Nova. And the existing rear brakes are currently very rusty and not very intact. So I want to strip these down, renew all the serviceable parts and rebuild it and incorporate the Calibra handbrake system into the Nova handbrake lever and make it all work. But before I can do all that, I need to fit some new subframe bushes. Now remember, as it stands, I'm just doing a quick test fit build. The body won't be restored until it's driven and tested accordingly. So try not to worry about the lack of paint, etc. That will get done eventually and it will be mint one day. But for now, all I want to do is make it mechanically sound so I can take it on a test track and make sure it drives okay. And then I'll restore it. So now the bushes are done, it's time to take wheels off and start doing the brakes. Now these discs are slightly unusual because we've got a built-in drum for the handbrake assembly. There's one Phillips screw holding it together and it should just slide off. But when the handbrake's worn, sometimes it can be a little bit awkward. So I'm no expert on brakes, but I'm pretty certain they needed changing. Right, so the next job is to clean up the mating surface on the hub flange. I also clean up the centre because this is on show and I want to paint it so it looks a bit better. Once I'm happy with the flange, I degrease it and use a bit of X primer. I then take the retaining clips out of the brake shoes, pull back the springs, which is a little bit awkward, and remove the brake shoe assembly. Now you can see here there's a basic lever set up at the bottom. The handbrake cable pulls on that, which expands the shoes and locks the drum. Quite simple. So we're now onto the rebuild. I start off by wire wheeling the adjuster and greasing it all up so it operates smoothly. I then fit the new shoes and new springs and the new retaining clips. Now the disc shields aren't in the best condition, but the centre of them do retain the brake shoes. So I decide just to cut the outer edge off and clean it up. I then paint the centre of the hub flange silver and start work on the brake calipers. So the calipers have clearly been painted lots of times over the years. So what I want to do is strip it all off and make sure everything's in good condition and it all works. So I knock the brake pad pins out to start off with, just use a punch for this. Then I push the pistons in, make sure they operate freely, which they do, and I wire wheel the calipers and remove as much paint as I can. And once I'm happy with them, I degrease them and then give them a good couple of coats of X primer, followed by some gloss black. Now don't they look better already? So there we go, that's the brake caliper all stripped back, X primed and painted, and it looks a lot better. I'm really chuffed with it. So the next job is to fit it onto this, put the brake pads in, and then repeat the process on the other side. So this caliper is held on with 2 bolts and should be a really easy job. But as always in the car modification world, things don't go to plan. we have one very big, massive, huge, colossal problem. Old brake disc, new brake disc. Same size. Problem is, offset is different. I don't know if you can see that. But basically, the disc sits inbound around, what, 8mm more than this one. Meaning, the brake caliper does not fit. And that is a little bit of a problem, isn't it? Or a lot of a problem. Bagger. It's about an hour later and a bit dirty because I've been using the time to clean some parts up. Now, I'm going to have to get some new rear discs, unfortunately. That is a pain. They seemed a bit of a bargain online. The ones that I kind of need now are about 120 quid for two. I'm hopefully going to find some a bit cheaper than that because that seems a little bit extortionate. But anyway, what I can do in the meantime is start working out all the brake lines, etc. So these are the original rear brake lines off my spare axle. Now they're steel ones and they're in really good condition. I've given them a quick sand down and a bit of black paint just to give them a bit more longevity, but they are in really good condition. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to stick the brake caliper on. I'm going to put this steel line on. Then I'm going to use my Nova braided hoses on this axle and see roughly where they need to be. Then we're going to start making some brackets to hold all that into place. So we're now at the point in the video where I'm going to ask you guys to subscribe. So obviously these videos take a lot of time. And they also take quite a lot of money. So subscribing helps the channel. It's completely free to do so. And it helps me make this kind of content for you guys. So if you enjoy it, like the video, subscribe and share it with your friends. So there we go. That is the brake caliper on, brake pipe going to the Nova braided hose. Now this is a Goodrich hose. I've had them years. They're a bit better quality than the standard ones. They shouldn't flex as much. So I want to reuse them because they're still in good condition. Right, so the plan is I'm going to make a little bracket what holds this hose here, comes off the chassis leg, just welds on. I'm going to make new brake pipes going front to rear. That's the plan. First off, I get a bit of 2mm steel sheet which I've got in the scrap bin, just an offcut. I mark a 30mm strip of it, put some holes in it, cut it all out, fold it in the vise, and there we have it. Hose fits in nicely, and this is ready to be welded on. Right, and there she is. So, as you can see, 90-degree bracket, put two holes in it, one for the hose and one to weld it. And that is literally going to weld on something like that. The brake pipe's going to come out at a 90 degree and then run down the chassis leg. Right, so I've just clamped this bracket up just to make sure that's kind of the right place. Next job, I just want to unbolt this shock absorber just to make sure I've kind of got a full range of travel. I don't want it to catch on anything. I don't think it will, but I just want to check. And yeah, then we can weld the bracket on. There we go, that goes up and down nicely. There's no strain on the hose, so that should do the job perfectly. So I'm going to put the shock back on and then stick the bracket on. So there we go, that is that side welded on nice and solid. So now I need to order some brake lines and some brake discs. So the cables, they're far too long. Ooh, they're very too long. I was hoping they would end about the right place. I suppose that was naive of me really to think that, because they actually end somewhere near the gear stick. And I need them to end somewhere near the passenger seat really. So I've kind of got that much too long. So I'm going to have a bit of a think about that. I think I'm going to do that. So these do need modifying, and I don't think I should do it just yet. I think I should get the prop on first, because these are going to need cutting down, and I just don't want to do it and then realise they're in the way of the prop. So yeah, I'd rather do that last. It's only a handbrake. It's not the end of the world anyway. But yeah, a little bit annoying that they're so far too long, but such is life. Can't do a lot about it. So it's 3 days later, and now the parts have arrived. So what we got? So we've got some conifer brake line. Now this is like a copper nickel brake line. It's stronger than copper. It's not as hard as steel, and it's kind of, in my opinion, the best kind of stuff to use to make brake lines. Steel rots out. Copper's too soft. This is perfect. We've also got some fittings in there, and some, as you can see, some brake pipe clips. Just cheapo ones. So I'm going to bolt them to the underside of the vehicle, so all fastens on nicely. And the correct brake disc, hopefully.
Perfect. So, believe it or not, these are actually quite difficult to get hold of. So I tried getting a standard set which weren't drilled and grooved, but every company I went to said they're out of stock, can't get them for whatever reason. There was some on eBay at extortionate prices, but I didn't want to pay that much. These are M-Tech brake discs. Obviously they're drilled and grooved, so performance brakes, and they were £75 delivered for two, so not too bad. So these ones I got originally were a bit of a bargain at 40 quid, however they don't fit. I think they're from a Cab V6, I'm not sure. So yeah, I'm going to sell these and fit these. Right, let's get them on there. So I always grease the mounting flanges before I put this on. Not everybody agrees with this, but it's the way I've been taught and it's never done me any harm. Put the retaining screw in the disc, then bolt the caliper up. It's got a couple of 90mm bolts holding it on, and then the brake pads are really simple. They just slide in. Again, I put a bit of grease on these, put new pins in. Again, these just knock in easily with a bit of grease, and then there's like an anti-rattle spring. This hooks underneath. Finally, I set the handbrake up using a flat screwdriver. You basically got to turn the wheel around till it's tight, hit it with a hammer a few times, lock it off so it's absolutely solid, then wind it back about half a turn. Simple as that. Right, so next job is to connect the front to rear brake lines. Now these were the brake lines which were on the front. They did have a joiner underneath. These have been made in Conifer years and years ago. So what I've done, I've taken them off. I've straightened them a little bit because we're going to reroute it. Now originally where this went is where the transfer box is going, so they can't route down there. So I've come up with a new plan. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to feed these through that hole down there, which is a factory hole, and then I can bend them and route them exactly how I want. Another thing I've done, just for a little bit of protection and safety, I've put a little bit of silicone tube on, as you can see. So this is going to go through the hole and act as a grommet. It's a nice tight fit, and it's just going to stop these brake lines rattling around. Right, let's get these fitted. Right, so that's just feeding through straight down that hole. I loosely put them on. So I've just put the rubber sleeves over the pipes there, and I've clamped this little bracket like so. So that bracket's just like a folded bit of metal which clamps around it. It's a bit crude, it's a bit obsolete. So when we take the engine out, I will be cutting that off and then putting a proper plastic clip there. So I just think it looks better. Right, as you can see, that's the brake line straight through there. And to be fair, it routes really nicely, a lot better than factory. So next job, I need to bend them and fasten them to here. Now this is one of them tabs which I don't like. I'm not going to use that one. I'm going to drill it, put a riv nut in, and then bolt one of them plastic clips up. Now I love using this tool. So it's a riv nut tool. Riv nut means a riveted nut. So it's basically like a sleeved nut. You knock in, you can get them in various sizes, and then the tool rivets it up basically, clamps it in, and they're really good for doing things like this. They do a really nice factory finish. And there we go, that is that section done. One little clip, I've just used that as well, which is a factory clip, but like I say, when I restore the car properly, I probably will cut all these off. But I thought, as it's there, I might as well make it as secure as possible. Right, so that, the near side hose, and that is the offside hose, perfect. So now I need to extend it from there to there. So the plan was to follow the factory lines as much as possible. So as this bit of floor is original, I follow where the original brake lines go. When it gets to the back end, as the chassis legs are all custom made, I have to go a little bit rogue. So I've just routed them in the most obvious way, essentially. Try and keep them out of the way of the prop shaft and all the other little things. I try and make sure there's going to be enough clips to hold everything into place. It's not going to rattle or vibrate. So once all the clips are on, I put some M6 bolts through it with washers, makes them nice and strong. Now, if you want to know where I've got all this stuff from, let me know in the comments below. Right, so all the brake pipe clips are now fitted to the chassis. Next job is to start making the pipes up. Right, so I've got my 3/16 brake pipe. This is standard size for most cars. I've got my nut on it. I'm going to put it in the tool. This fits essentially in here, and what you're meant to do is line the end up with the end of the tool there. So it's going to go in like so. Then I'm going to lock it off. And then what I want is an op one end. Op one, which is punch one, which gives it a convex end.
Then all we do is line it up, pull the lever. And there we go, that's giving it a nice perfect end. Right, we'll fit this to the car and go from there. So what I've done, I've just bent the basic shape of where this brake pipe needs to go. I've used a brake pipe bender, which is this tool here. It's pretty cheap and it just gives it a nice finish. So next job, I'm going to start fitting it. And then obviously it's going to need cutting down because I've kind of made it a little bit too long. This end's going to fit nicely and then I need to cut it down somewhere down there and then put the correct end on the other end. So let's get that fitted. Right, now I need to work out the length, which wants to be, I'd say, about there. That'll allow for a little bit of crimping. Right, so this is the same as the other one, but it's an op2. So we're doing an op2 fitting on this end. So the op1 is basically flared that way. Op2 puts a little centre in the middle of that, so it's sort of 45-degree centre. So op1 can fit inside op2. So that's the op1. And that's the op2. You can see there's a nice little tapered centre in it. Right, so that is one side. Done, I'm chuffed with that. Right, we're on to the second pipe now. This is the offside one. Now, I've done it slightly different. I put this adapter on, which makes it slightly different because it's going to have two male ends, two op1 ends, whereas the other pipe has an op1 and an op2 fitting. So I've done that for two reasons. A, it staggers the joint slightly, and B, it means if I ever take the pipes off, I can't put them back on in the wrong order. They're handed. You can't get it wrong, basically. So I've made it idiot-proof. Right, let's start making the pipe. So it's exactly the same process as before. Now, first top tip from me is to make sure you slide your nut on before you flare it. The amount of times I've not done this, I've realised afterwards and I had to cut the end off. And obviously, if you make it the right length in the first place, the pipe's going to be too short. Second top tip is don't do it like I'm doing it. I'm doing it as I go along. I would advise measuring the pipe first and using a bit of string. I've done countless amount of brake pipes over the years and I'm more than confident doing it. However, I'm aware this is probably the slightly harder way. And my final top tip is to make sure you put your bends in the right place, because this stuff only bends once or twice before it starts getting a bit brittle. And there we go. That is that side. All done front to rear. Next job, bleed the brakes. Right, so I've been round, I've checked all bleed nipples to make sure they're free. They are. I filled it with racing brake fluid. I'm using a pressure bleeder, and the next job is to crack the nipples off and get all the air out. It's going to use an old bottle. Put a hose in, off the bleed nipple. And there we go. That's that. You can see all the air coming out there. Obviously, this is a new brake line, new brake calipers. It's going to be full of air. 2 down, 2 to go. Again, I don't advise you doing it this way. You're meant to do the rears first and then the fronts, but hey ho, it'll be fine. Last one. And again, look at all the bubbles coming out. All done. So, next job, we're going to quickly check for brake leaks. All the fittings I've put on, everything looks good so far. All good. Beautiful. So that's that. I've just pumped the pedal up and it feels awesome. There's no leaks. I'm super stoked. Really pleased. So it's basically running a Calibra turbo engine, and it hasn't run for a couple of years, and it hasn't run since I've done the four-wheel drive conversion. Now, the last time it did run, we did have a bit of an issue. So when it was getting really hot, it was starting to go off a cylinder, and I also noticed it was running lean on full boost, which it's never done before. So I pulled out the original injectors, and I've had them tested at Salt and Pepper Racing, done by Ian Pepper, and as you can see from these figures here, they're not good. This one, very low, 270cc. It should be around 320, 330 from memory. So he's had these apart, cleaned them, replaced the filters, and this is what we've got: 324, 324, 324, and 320. So they are basically bang on brand new injectors again. So the original plan was to fit these red Saab injectors. Now these are genuine Bosch injectors, and as always, I've had them tested by Ian. And as you can see, they've come back good. What I have noticed though, these are meant to be 360cc injectors, and they're not. They're 236. That's what they've come back as after a clean. The yellow injectors, which shouldn't flow as much, are around 320cc. So the yellow ones are actually going to spray more fuel than these. This is a common mod, so I'm very confused why that's happened. I don't know whether it's a bit of an error from Ian, but I can't see how he could have written them all down incorrectly. So yeah, because of that, I'm going to put the yellows back in, not the reds. So in a future video, we will be fitting a much bigger turbo on this, and we're going to be restoring the car. But for now, all I want to do is test the four-wheel drive system, make sure everything works, because it's had a lot of mods to get it this far. And then if it's all good, we'll strip it down to a bare shell. I'm going to do a bare shell restoration, including air conditioning and lots of mods you guys have probably never seen before. So if you're interested in that, hit that subscribe button, then you won't miss another update. Right, let's get the injectors fitted and crack on with this build. So I always find things go in a lot easier with lube. So I use some clear silicone lube on the brand new O-rings of these injectors, so they slide into the inlet manifold and into the fuel rail really nicely and really easily. I put them all in, push the rail down, bolt the rail on, and then fasten on the loom to the top of the injectors, fit the throttle cable bracket and the throttle cable, and finally I attach all the ECU earths. Once that's done, I put the breathers back on the rocker cover, and that is the injectors installed properly. So back in the day, when this was just a two-wheel drive version of what it is today, when it used to look nice, this made 300 horsepower on a dyno. Now it has quite a few little mods to get it up to that kind of power. One of them mods, a supporting mod, is this fuel pressure regulator. So as you can probably see, this isn't standard. So what I've done, I've taken the original fuel pressure regulator off, which is this one here. This is 3 bar, but non-adjustable. And because this is running EDS phase 2 chips, it recommends upping the fuel pressure to 3.5 bar. So the easy way to do that, in my opinion, is to fit one of these, and then that allows you to put your own custom fuel pressure regulator in. Now I did have an adjustable one, but I found it went out of tune a lot, so I fitted this. Now this is a modified Vectra V6 fuel pressure regulator, so I've cut the rail down and I made it fit this. Yeah, and the beauty of that is I can take this regulator out and I can fit loads of aftermarket ones which are readily available, or I could go to the scrapyard and get loads out of Audis, or lots of German cars have these Bosch fittings. So they literally undo that clip, it pulls out, you get them in loads of different sizes. So that at the minute is a 3.5 bar one. I've also fitted a 3.8 bar one in the past, so I can kind of tune the fuel in for the setup and make it run the best I can. So with the phase 2 chips, this here, 21 psi coming out of the turbo and a naturally aspirated inlet cam, which gives another 1mm lift. It made 300 horsepower, which, as you can imagine, I was absolutely thrilled with. So next job, I need to fit the brake servo line. Now, if I don't fit this, there's going to be a massive vacuum leak and it's not going to run properly. So this is a modified item. So it's basically, I've used a standard valve. This is a one-way valve. Used the standard Nova coupling on the end, which screws into the inlet manifold. And then the standard fitting, which goes inside the servo. I've used reinforced silicone hose connected to, and it works perfectly. So we'll push that in there. And then fit that there. Another little job which isn't really essential for it to run,
that I want to do is I need to put some oil in this gearbox. Now I've just fitted all this. This is an F17 setup which I've converted to fit the Nova, and that's an F20 gearbox, four-wheel drive box as well. So best way to fill these is to take the breather out the top of the gearbox, which is that bit there, and then just pour the oil straight in. So that's what we're going to do. Now I absolutely cocked this up and I didn't even see it happening. So basically, when I fitted the transfer box a few weeks ago, I didn't put all the bolts in what secures it to the gearbox. Now I didn't do this because I knew it was coming back out and it was a bit awkward to get to. So I left one out, but what I didn't realise is that made a hole inside of the gearbox essentially. So when I filled it up, half the oil came out on the floor. I didn't even realise at the time of filming. Anyway, I've now rectified that and it's okay. The next job, again, not essential, but we're going to do it anyway, coolant pipes. So if you've watched my previous videos, you'll know how all these coolant pipes work and where they go. But basically, even though it's the wrong engine in the car, they pretty much all go to the standard position. Now these are Roos upgraded silicone hoses. They're much better quality than the original rubber, and they're about 10 years old now. They're lasting very well. So yeah, I'm pleased with them. Another obvious one, this is obviously going to cause it a big air leak, is the intake hose for the turbo. So this goes from an intercooler to the top hat, which is the upper part of the inlet manifold. So we need to get this on. Now, if you've ever worked on a C20 let know that you'll know things are quite tight up front, and this is no exception. So this boost pipe is incredibly tight to the front engine mount, but we do get it on with a bit of a wiggle. I dread to think how bad it's going to be when a new turbo is fitted, but like anything, I'll get around it. So next job, spark. It's not going to run without a spark, so let's put the Dizzy on. So there is an oil feed to this, so it does fill up with oil. There should be an O-ring on the end. This does have an O-ring, but it's quite square. I will put a new one on, but for now, I'm just going to use a bit of sealant, which is a bit rough, but I'm only testing the car. I then put the leads on in the correct order. Now, again, this is fairly obvious because they're all different lengths. Obviously, longest goes to the furthest away, and vice versa. Connect the coil, and that's the spark side of things all sorted. And finally, I strap up all the lube and all the hoses because I hate things that can chafe. Really annoys me. Coolant tank. This is a standard Nova item. It's got one acne screw holding it on, and it's got a little tab that clips into the chassis leg. A couple of hoses on that. Tighten them up. I put the screen wash tank and pump back in, and that's that side of things pretty much sorted. Right, so next job, to get it running, we need to do the fuel lines. Now, it's about a week later because I've been waiting for some parts to come, and this is what we've got. Right, so we've got a high flow fuel pump. Now, this should be capable of around 400 litres per hour, which is more than enough. Also got a fancy billet aluminium fuel filter. Got some fuel hose, some clips, and this fuel tank. Now, I'm not sure if I'm going to keep this long term. It's very nicely made. Really like it. There's nothing wrong with it. However, I wasn't sure if I really wanted one in the boot. I originally wanted a fuel tank underneath, but there's not a lot of space. So I bought this just so I could test the car, and we'll see. But yeah, first impressions, very well made, and it looks pretty cool, and it should fit there really well. So let's get this plumbed up. As you can see, that's where the original fuel tank would sit, but I've got a four-wheel drive axle, custom rear cross member, and lots of other bits in the way. So yes, there is a little bit of room, but I still need an exhaust silencer somewhere. So I think we're going to stick with inside for now. Right, first off, we need to extend the fuel lines. Right, so I'm almost certainly going to replace these original fuel lines with some copper ones at some point, but I'll do that when I take the engine out because I can't get to the back of the bulkhead. So for now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to extend these. Right, so on these, your blue is your feed and your black is return. So I start by mounting the fuel pump and the fuel filter. Now all these items I've got from AliExpress, and I am super impressed with the quality. Yes, some people say don't use Chinese parts, blah, 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 blah. However, yeah, I'm not going for the cheapest stuff. This is the higher end Chinese stuff, and I think they're going to be more than fine. So yeah, it's a rubber mounted pump. I bolt it to the floor, and then I bolt the fuel filter to the cross member. I did use proper branded AM fittings and branded UK supplied fuel lines just because I didn't want any issues with fuel leaks. However, I'm sure the Chinese ones would have been fine, and they're probably made in the same place anyway.
I routed all the pipes and then clipped them to the floor using some decent fuel hose fittings. As always, if you want links to any of these items, comment below. Right, so now the fuel lines are mounted underneath and I'm happy with them. Next job's the fuel tank. Now what I've done, I've just put it in the centre and I've kind of put it in a logical place. So I'm having to use razors. So these are 40mm razors because there is a sump in the bottom of this fuel tank. So it's got a low spot where the fuel will sit essentially. So if it's low on fuel, it'll always have a little bit in. So because of that, I'm using the spacers. So I've just quickly measured roughly where it wants to be, and that is bang on in the centre. I'm happy where it exits, so it's now time to start screwing it down. So I mark and drill and use riv nuts as a captive nut. Now unfortunately, I thought I had some M8s in stock. I didn't, only had M6. So I've bought some, but for now I've used M6 bolts, which to be fair will probably be fine, but in the future videos I will change these to M8 just for a bit of extra security. Right, so the rear bolt hole needed to go bang on in the middle of this raised section here. So what I've done to make it work for me, I've used some spacers, some washers, a bolt and a nut, and I basically heated the panel up here, clamped them together to force that flat, which has given us a nice flat half circle. You can't really tell too much because I've just put a bit of paint on it, but it means this, instead of sitting on the edge like so, and rocking, now sits nice and flat, which is what we wanted. So I'm dead chuffed for that. So there we go, that's all 4 mounts done. So 1, 2, 3 and 4. And I've also, these are factory holes for the Land Rover floor. I've drilled them out, put a grommet in so the fuel lines can go in here. So we're going to have 1 return and then 1 breather. Right, and also, just so you know as well, I'm going to make an aluminium plate that goes over this. The fuel feed is going to go through it, and it's going to have riv nuts in it so it locks in. This is just a factory Land Rover hole, but it's actually worked out really well. So that'll be a later video. Right, let's put the fuel tank in. So I secured the tank down using some fittings. Now talking of security, if you want to secure my future with YouTube and you want to support the channel, all you need to do, if you haven't already, is click subscribe. If you like the content, subscribe away, share with your friends, and who knows where we're going to end out. Once the tank's in, I put the AM fittings on, feed the pipes through, and I'm really happy with the overall look of that. So I'm super thrilled with the overall look of both the fuel tank and the boot floor. I think it looks really performance-y and everything's really nicely made, even if I do say so myself. And there we go, so that is the breather, which just tucks underneath the axle, and then the other side is the return, which goes to the front of the vehicle. So all I've got left to do now is put a feed pipe to the fuel pump from the fuel tank. So I've used a 10mm barbed fitting. This is an AN10. It's fairly big and should do the job perfectly. I've just made this hose up. Now it just needs fitting. So it's now on, and I've gone round and checked all the fuel pipes are nice and tight. So all we've got to do now is extend the fuel pump wiring and connect it up, fill the tank up with some fresh petrol, connect the battery, and it should start. Fingers crossed. So you've got to remember the entire fuel system is either new or completely dry, but didn't expect it to start straight away. However, good things come to those that wait. Hey, hey, hey! No rattles, no leaks, no problems. I am thrilled. We need to make the prop shaft work, and we also need to make the rear drive shafts work. As you can see, they're not doing anything. Right, let's crack on. Now, off camera, I've already made one of these. Ooh. Right, so off camera, I've already made one of these. So this is standard Cleaver drive shaft, rear one, quite hard to get hold of now. What I've done is I've chopped it in the middle and I've shortened it. In today's episode, one of the things we're going to do is going to show you guys how I did this. So it's going to be a bit like Blue Peter. Here's one I prepared earlier. Let's show you how I did it. Right, so we're going to fit this to start off with, and then we'll do the other side.
So I quickly fit the drive shaft. It's really simple. Slides into the diff first and then bolts up to the hub. So got 6 bolts holding it on, and that's pretty much it.
Right, so what I've done, I've cut this muck out the drive shaft. Now, obviously, this is a narrowed back axle. That's why I've had to do it. So the wheels fit under the standard Nova wheel arches, and I haven't had to go wide body. So I've had these sleeves machined, which slide over the top. They're quite a tight fit. They're not perfect, but they're fairly tight. And what I'm going to do is true it up the best I can by eye, give it a couple of tacks. Then I'm going to use a DTR, which is a dial test indicator, to see how true it is. I'll tap it into place if it's not very good. Give it another tack and just keep doing that and get it as straight as possible. Now, diff cover is off because it sounds a little bit rumbly. Now, I'm not sure why that is. I can't see anything wrong with it, obvious anyway. There's no debris inside. So maybe it's just me hearing things, who knows. Maybe when I put oil in it's going to be okay, but it does sound a bit rumbly. So that is something I'm slightly concerned about, but I do have a spare. Right, let's get back to welding this.
So I use the TIG welder to do this mainly because it does a nice, neat weld. Now, I am no professional with a TIG welder. However, I can stick things together. Please don't judge me. I do my best.
Right, so I've tagged it with a TIG welder. And I was going to use a DTI, but this came to me and I think this is a better idea. So I'm using my transmission stand and I've just put a little bit of pressure on it. And what I've basically done is made sure it's touching all the way around, because initially it was slightly off. So that's nice and true. I can see it is. So next job is to put some more tacks on it. Just keep checking it and make sure it's true.
So once I'm happy it's all running nice and true, I take it off and then weld it up properly in the vise. Now back to the diff. I've since put some oil in it, spun it up, and it sounds absolutely fine. So I think I was just imagining things. So all being well, that's one less thing I need to worry about. There's a completed weld, and it doesn't look too bad. Like I say, I'm no professional.
So I've just had a couple of weeks off from filming. I've been on holiday, but we're now back and raring to go on this build. But I have done a few things off camera since you last seen me. So I put this drive shaft in and I've painted it, put the diff cover on, filled the diff with gear oil, and I've done a bolt check on the back end. So this lot is all good to go. So the original prop shaft support brackets are kind of like an S shape for the Cleaver turbo, and as you can imagine, they don't fit the tunnel of this Vauxhall Nova. So I'm going to make some new ones out of this rusty old box section, which may not look very presentable, but when I'm done with it, it's going to look great. So this is 2.5mm wool box section, so fairly thin, and the idea is I'm going to chop down it and make it into a little channel. The channel is going to give it extra strength, and it's going to look better and more professional and stronger than just standard 2.5mm plate. Plus it's kind of going to look more factory, shall we say. So I'm going to cut this down now. Let's see what she looks like.
Now, if you've been watching me for a while, you'll know I like making things out of scrap. Stuff like this, a rusty old bit of box section, which was destined for the scrap bin, covered in concrete one end, but I've managed to cut it down and repurpose it and make it into something usable again. It's not cost me anything either, and the finished result's pretty good, if I do say so myself.
So what I've done, I've straightened these brackets for the centre bearing. There's 2 centre bearings. I've cut this section to 11 inches. And the plan is, it's basically going to bolt along there, and that's going to hold that bit into place. So that's roughly where they need to be. I am going to elongate the holes to give it a little bit of adjustment anyway. But I'm going to centre them now, drill the holes out. I can bolt that up, and I can bolt this to the floor.
So I use a centre punch to mark the centres, and drill it out with a high-speed steel 8mm drill bit, and then I go over that with a die grinder piece in a drill. This is just to elongate the hole. If I'm honest, it didn't go quite to plan, so I finished it with a file, but the end result's pretty good. I bolt it to the prop shaft once I'm happy with the position, and then drill through into the floor and then bolt that down with M8 bolts. Now eventually I will weld the bolts in and make it captive bolts. It's a stud stuck out the bottom, but for now this will do. Now this is mounted up properly, I can then decide the length of the prop shaft. I mark it with a Sharpie, and then I clamp on a Jubilee clip and make sure it's nice and square using a ruler. I use the Jubilee clip for a reference point for cutting the prop down. This means I've got a nice straight edge, cut round it with a grinder, and I knock in the insert. Now the insert's an interference fit, so I don't need to worry too much about this being massively out, because it shouldn't be. So what I do is I drill through the prop shaft, which allows me to do a plug weld, and I use a straight edge just to make sure everything is nicely in line. I make this end solid by welding both sides, and then I can start knocking it into the other side. Again, I keep checking it with a straight edge as I do it to make sure everything is through. Now at a good point in the video to say a massive thank you to all the new subscribers. We've just recently hit 5,000 subscribers, which is absolutely amazing, and I'm over the moon with it. Now the car will be in use soon, and you're probably going to see it at Santipod. So if you do see me and the car, please come and say hello, and if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button and like the video. Here's the next 5,000 subscribers, and of course my favourite car, this 4-wheel drive Vauxhall Nova. So now the insert's welded into one side of the prop shaft, it's time to attach the other side. Now this is a very tight interference fit. It's basically a press fit. So it took quite a lot of tapping and knocking to get it in. But I did eventually get there. I then put it back in a vise and used the steel rule to check that it was all straight. It wasn't absolutely perfect to start off with, so I give it a couple of taps with a copper hammer, and then eventually I was happy with it. So then drilled 2 holes opposite sides to each other, plug welded one of them and left the other one open so I could physically attach the prop to the car before I welded it, just to make sure it's as true as I can get it. So I'm sure there's quite a few people saying I've done this wrong, I shouldn't have done it like that. Well, it's only to test the car. I wanted to do it quick. If I feel any vibrations or if I have any concerns, I'll get it remade at a prop shaft specialist once I restore the car. But for now, I'm sure this is going to do. Right, so now the prop shaft's in one piece and tacked together. I need to jack it into the right places and transmission stand, work out exactly where I want it to go. And I can make this adapter fit. So this is going to be the clamp that holds it to the floor, like I've done at the back. But yeah, we are getting there. So I've never done anything like this before, if I'm going to be completely honest with you. I've never made a prop shaft, but I just assumed, rightly or wrongly, that it'd be best to be as straight as possible. So that's the kind of approach I went. I tried to make it as straight as possible and as direct as possible to the back axle. So hopefully it's going to work well. I can't see why it won't. And if it doesn't, I can always make it again, but I'm fairly confident it's going to be okay. So I repeat the process exactly the same as last time, bolt the bracket through the floor, and then once I'm happy with the prop, you get a few spins, similar to how I did the drive shaft actually. Once I'm happy it's nice and true, and then fill the other plug weld in, and then I seam weld all the way around the prop shaft once I'm 100% happy that it's okay. Like I said earlier, this probably isn't the correct way of doing things, however, I'm fairly confident it's going to work. Right, so that is the prop shaft all welded. I'm really happy with it, which means I can officially say for the first time on this channel, I have a 4-wheel drive Vauxhall Nova. Look at that. This makes me beyond happy. You would not believe. Wow. Taken nearly a year, guys, but we got there. Obviously, I don't have a lot of time. I'm a dad, got a full-time job, and I just do this as a hobby. So I am absolutely thrilled with how far we've come in the last year. Yeah, absolutely buzzing. I can't wait to get this on the track. On to the next job now, which is going to be the exhaust. Right, we're so nearly there now, guys. We need to make an exhaust, put some seats in, check some bolts, and it's ready for a test drive. So here's the exhaust. Now, as you can see, it's not a very big exhaust. This is a modified Klebra Turbo downpipe. I thought it was 3-inch. It's not. It's 2 3/4. I bought some 3-inch bends to go on the end of it, and obviously they're the wrong size. So what I've done, that's the original one I bought. Here's the modified one. I basically heated the end up and I've tapered it in slightly using some grips and a hammer. Just bent it all in until it's a nice tight fit. So that's really loose. This is a nice tight fit. Just like so, as you can see. And that end is very wobbly. So that can weld straight onto this. And the idea is, because it's only going to Santipod and I don't have any noise regulations, it's going to go straight down like that. This is going to run down the side of the transfer box and literally point to the floor. So I don't need to be making any kind of complicated exhaust because I'm going to be changing the turbo on this anyway. So this is pretty much going to be redundant when I do that. So for now, this is going to be perfect. It's going to be very loud. It's going to sound awesome. As this is only going to be a temporary exhaust, I'm probably going to only use it for a day. I don't go to town on it. So I literally bolt it up and just tack on this 45-degree elbow. Now this is only there to direct the flames onto the floor rather than onto the fuel lines. So it's serving a purpose, but it isn't there for anything else. Then I go in my scrap bin, find a bit of offcut of stainless and just weld on a little bracket to transfer box just to hold it in place. And that is the exhaust all done. Now it's not going to offer any silencing, but it is going to sound epic.
Right, so now the exhaust's done, all we've got to do is put the driver's seat in and then we can see if it drives, which hopefully it will do. However, we're going to get a little bit of bonus content. Now, I wasn't going to do this on camera, but I figured it was kind of interesting. So, previous episode, I mentioned the handbrake cables were too long. So, what I've done, I just chopped about a foot out of one of them. That's the original Nova joiner, which connects the handbrake lever to the Nova cables. I welded an M10 nut on that, as you can see here. Yeah, this is going to go onto here. I'm running in the standard position of a Nova. Then I can connect the shortened Calibra cables to this, hopefully, all being well. Now, it should be an M8 threaded bar what goes into the Calibra cables. I didn't have any M8, so I've just used M10 and drilled the hole out a little bit more. It's not a problem. If anything, it's going to be a bit stronger. Right, let's put this on and see how it works. What I've done now is I've put the inner cable back in. I've shortened it by the same amount, and then I've used the battery terminal and crimped it on to the end of it to act as a stop, basically, because I had to cut the original piece off. And that seems to work really well. So I'm just going to do the other side on camera to show you.
So this is the same hydraulic crimper I used to shorten the gear cables. It's actually come in really handy for this project, so I would recommend getting one of these, although they are a little bit expensive. Great for stuff like this though.
There we go.
Same just a case of putting the cables into place and sliding it over the new M10 threaded bar, and I put a couple of nuts on to lock it off.
So I've just made this little cable mount off camera. Now, I've done it really quickly, but basically I've used a little bit of tube, put a slot in it so the cables can go through. This is going to hold the outer cables in place. It should work a treat. Now, it's very over-engineered. As you can see, it's made out of about a 3 or 4 mil thick box section, but it's what I had laying around, so it's going to do the job nicely. I just need to weld it to the rear crossmember now. That's another job ticked off the list. And there we go, that's all welded on. Now I do need to cut this down still, but I just want to make sure it's working before I do that. But yeah, pretty chuffed for that. So standard Nova connector, nut welded on the end, double nutted with M10 threaded bar going straight through the middle onto shortened Calibra turbo gear cables and a custom little mount bracket here. Should work, nice. So we go into the back of the disc, as you can see there, across there, over the axle, and exactly the same on the other side.
And after a year of hard work, all that's left to do now is bolt the driver's seat in, and then I can drive it for the first time. And like all good projects, well, not everything goes quite as smoothly as you wanted it to. So I had visions of elegantly driving this out the garage, talking to the camera, but unfortunately that didn't go to plan. Never mind, it did move a couple of foot before it cut out. I'll just push it instead.
Right, so that didn't go to plan. I've just run out of petrol, but it did just drive for the first time by itself. So I am absolutely buzzing. Next time you see this, she's going to be drag racing. So we are at Santapod Raceway, as you can see, and we're going to drive this Vauxhall Nova, which is four-wheel drive converted, for the first time. So the plan for today is I want to iron out little faults, make sure there's nothing glaringly obvious, and make sure she drives straight, and then I might open the power up a little bit more. But initially, I just want to make sure she drives okay. I'm absolutely buzzing for this, but if I'm going to be honest, I'm also very nervous. So let's get it on the track and see what she does.
So I was really nervous at this point. I was concerned it wasn't going to drive straight. I was concerned that I might break something. I was concerned the prop shaft might vibrate. But as I eased up to the line, I just had to go with it and just hope for the best. Getting over second and fourth gear, the car was misfiring like mad, but on the positive, it did drive straight, so I thought I'd go for another run straight away. So the launch was awesome, however second and fourth gear still wasn't working. It definitely wasn't a user error and the misfire wasn't getting any better. We've done 2 runs. We've got a misfire under full boost, which is either fuel related or spark. I think it's spark. Now it hasn't been, the engine was fine before and I haven't run it for 2 years. So I'm going to take the plugs out, clean and dizzy up and just make sure everything looks okay. Hopefully it's a bit of damp or something in there that's causing a problem. The other issue is I'm struggling to get it in second gear or fourth gear under load. Normally it goes in. One of the outer cables is stretching slightly. It's moving where I've crimped it. So I need to try and look at that, see if I can sort it. But we did just launch it in first gear then. And oh my God, it's quick. Like I can't describe how much quicker it was than what it used to be when it was 2-wheel drive. So yeah, absolutely stoked. Really, really happy. I just need to get it in second gear and get it to rev out properly. And I think we are nearly certainly going to beat my personal best then. So let's whip the spark plugs out and see if we can find anything wrong. Now, obviously, I came here to test the four-wheel drive system. The car's always had a good engine, never had any engine problems before, and I've always serviced it and maintained it really well. So what I wasn't expecting to have was a misfire. Right, confession to make, my spark plugs are very rusty. I'm a little bit embarrassed. Now, bear in mind, I did say it ran okay last time I used it. I think I washed it before I put it away, and as you can probably see from there, they're very rusty. So I'd imagine that's probably my issue. Yeah, it is what it is. So I'm going to clean them up because I didn't bring spares because I didn't have an engine problem. I wanted to test the transmission. Didn't think to bring spares, did I? So yeah, I'm going to clean them up and hopefully that'll make it better. At this point, morale was pretty low. I felt a right idiot and I felt like I wasted a day and we probably wouldn't get anywhere. But luckily for me, my fortune was about to change. So, because I didn't think there's anything wrong with the engine, I didn't bring any engine spares. But my faith in humanity has been restored. Some lovely gentlemen just came over to me and they've given me some HC leads free of charge, as well as 2 sets of spark plugs. They said, we've heard you got a misfire, we've come to help you. Absolute gents, can't thank them enough. So thank you very much, guys. So I'm now going to fit these. I'm going to try and set the gear cable up a bit better and then go for another run. Buzzing. So please excuse the audio quality. It was incredibly windy at this point. I just wanted to show my emotion in the video. And I wanted to give out a massive thanks to Aaron and his mates for helping me out. They really did save the day. Right, so we're back in the car. Transmission's working good. I've re-crimped the cable a little bit and had a bit of a play. And the engine's running spot on now. So massive thanks to Aaron and his mates who helped me out big time. Right, I'm now going to go by myself, because last time it hooked up so well, I feel like I could beat my personal best from when it was a 2-wheel drive car. So I feel like everything's right now. I feel like the engine's running fine. The gear lever seems to be working spot on. So fingers crossed when I get into the 11th. My personal best in a 12.3 seconds. So I'm just going to go to the line and absolutely send it. See what it does. I do know it hooks up really well. So I'm quietly confident I can do this. If I get a good run, I reckon I'll beat it. So just waiting in the station lane and hopefully we'll be going soon. Wish me luck. Nova. Nova V Nova, right? You can see that. That's minute 3. I think it's about 450 horsepower. Maybe wrong. 2-litre turbo. Should be a very quick car. It's got some nice stuff on it. Big slick wheels. Yeah. Looks a very capable car. That was a really good run. I'm really happy with that. Wow! Got a little bit of a bolt, other than that, it was a mint.
absolutely bent. Wow! So, my wife's in the car. Say hello, Zoe.
Hiya.
This is the first time she's been in the car for a very long time now.
Yeah.
She's not a massive fan of fast cars, but you do like them a bit. So, this might terrify her. We'll see.
Yeah, ready to terrify me.
Still not revving out properly. It's bogging down between gear changes, top end, and I've no idea why. It's never done this before, but other than that, it's
God,
very
that's
quick.
loud.
Sorry?
That's so loud.
I know. I can't even make it go quiet. Now the track was very busy. There's some really quick cars doing some good times, but unfortunately a few cars did break, meaning the guys at the track had to work really hard to get it all clean for us and make it nice and safe. But we sat waiting patiently, and before we knew it, was back on track, ready to go. Right, we're back in. We keep getting like an ignition cut or something. The first gear keeps bogging down, but then it's fine. So that's one problem, and it's stopping us from getting our personal best because it's really slowing the car down. But other than that, she's running absolutely great. Drives really nice. No vibrations or nasty noises from the rear prop or diff or anything like that. So banging. So we're going to go for another go. Again, not here to beat our best time, but if we do, fantastic. Now that was a good race. I changed a little bit short of where it was cutting out and it just shifted really nice, and we pretty much stayed neck and neck with the turbo metro the whole way down. We both loved it and it was a proper buzz. So I think this would have been the best run of the day, but for some reason I've backed off way before the finishing line. I have no idea why, but hey ho, that's racing. So I've achieved what I've set out to achieve basically. I've come here to enjoy myself and make sure the car drives nicely before I restore it, and it does. So we're going to have one more go. I don't think I'm going to beat my personal best, but let's have another go by myself and see what I can do. I've learned a couple of things about it, so yeah. Fingers crossed, wish me luck. I don't know if you can see this camper next to me, but this is Phil. It's got a 3 litre V6 Amiga engine in the back of a camper. It's doing about 13.7 quarters, 13.4 I think it's done. Going really well. It's pretty awesome, sounds good. Really nice guy as well, so yeah. Wish more luck. He wants to get a bit more power out of it soon, but it's 260 horsepower in a minute, so pretty cool to be fair. I like stuff like that, it's a bit different. So it looks like I'm going to be racing against him. So let's see what we can do. So this is it, last chance of the day to beat my personal best. Can I do it? So that definitely felt the fastest run, and it was. I also got a new personal best 60 foot time, which was
0.2 of a second faster than before, which is quite a lot. My 0 to 60 time and 0 to 100 time were exactly the same as before, and bearing in mind this engine isn't revving properly, and it's definitely down on power. We're also running tread tyres, not slicks, so there's definitely improvements to be made. I'm overjoyed, and the 4-wheel drive system is working perfectly. I've never known a Nova grip so well.
Well guys, that was a really good run. Like I say, it's not quite running 100%, but it's still a very quick car. Awesome. Oh god, this is so addictive. This is so addictive.
I hope it comes across on camera, but I am very happy at this point.
Right, so we've come to Santa Pod. We've had, I think, 6 runs. We've had ups and downs. We've had some amazing moments today, if I'm going to be completely honest. It's getting me a little bit emotional. We had Aaron and his friends early, came over, helped us out massively by giving us the spark plugs and the HT leads. I'm never going to make that mistake again. I always bring some spares like that. We've had some amazing launches. I'm absolutely over the moon with how well it goes. I don't think it wheel spins at all. I could be wrong, but it just seems to go. And this is with tread tyres. I didn't even need to put the slicks on. So what can I say? I am over the moon with the car. Yeah, we're going to take it back. We're going to fit air conditioning. We're going to fit a bigger turbo. We're going to make this a Nova you guys have probably never seen before. It's going to be awesome, and it's still going to look relatively standard when I'm done. So if you guys have enjoyed the video, yeah, this is the end of the series for now. Please show support by hitting the subscribe button, liking the video, and leaving a comment below, guys. Stay tuned for more. We'll be doing some more on this car soon. We're going to be putting a bigger turbo on it, and we're also going to be doing a Z-let conversion for a friend. So if that kind of thing interests you, make sure to hit the subscribe button and stay tuned for more. See you later, guys. Thank you. Bye bye.